Chapter 557. Not only is the glorious Sun Heavenly Lord at the 8th heavenly layer, his true form is the ancient golden crow. His combat strength is at its peak and Yi Xian is dead for sure. The immortal Wang of the South Pole sneered. Chaos Dojo. The heavenly monarch of the sun glory smiled cruelly. The 9 heavens' divine flames were surging, and the scorching aura that could smelt everything was too terrifying. He walked towards Yi Xian step by step, looking at him, as if he was looking at a dead person. Yi Xian, you're too arrogant. You wouldn't have ended up like this if you had taken a spot earlier. You fought dozens of Daoyo Jinxian in a row. You must have exhausted your cultivation, right? How are you a match for me? The glorious Sun Heavenly Lord was probing, but it was more of a disdain for Yi Xian. He was certain that Yi Xian was unparalleled in combat strength, but after fighting so many Daoyo Jinxian, he would definitely die if he faced him now. At this moment, Yi Xian stood at the center of the Chaos Dojo and watched indifferently as the glorious Sun Heavenly Lord walked toward him. A merciless glint flashed across his eyes as a sinister murderous intent appeared. Indeed, as the glorious Sun Heavenly Lord said, he had exhausted his cultivation after fighting dozens of grand heavenly layers. But did the glorious Sun Heavenly Lord really think he could defeat him? If the glorious Sun Heavenly Lord really thought so, then he was too ignorant. Yi Xian was never one to put himself in danger. The glorious Sun Heavenly Lord wanted to take advantage of the gap in his cultivation to fight him. Yi Xian could only say that the glorious Sun Heavenly Lord was too naive. Come, you beast! Yi Xian had one hand behind his back as he hooked his finger at the heavenly monarch of the sun. When this scene appeared in the eyes of the various great experts, it immediately caused an uproar, causing the expression of the heavenly monarch of the sun to change. Glorious Sun Monarch clearly remembered that Yi Xian had behaved the same way back on the starry sky ancient path. He had been caught off guard and suffered a great loss. Because of that, a grudge had formed between the two of them. Otherwise, why would he want to kill Yi Xian to avenge his humiliation? Yi Xian is too arrogant. This glorious Sun Heavenly Monarch is an 8th heavenly layer grand immortal realm cultivator. Even if he didn't encounter the previous round of attrition battle, the two of them would at most be tied. Now that he has angered glorious Sun Heavenly Monarch, I'm afraid the two of them will only stop after one of them dies, Shen Tu said coldly. Yi Xian is courting death. The 9 heavens' divine flame is the golden crow's innate skill. He's dead for sure today. South Pole Immortal Wang sneered. Cough cough. The netherworld Taoist coughed softly and said in a hoarse voice, This Taoist doesn't think so. This Yi Tiandi's cultivation is strange. I'm afraid glorious Sun Heavenly Monarch will die tragically in his hands. If I'm not wrong, he's carrying the Tongtian's celestial extinguishing sword. If he uses this sword, he can easily kill glorious Sun Heavenly Monarch. The sword demon said bluntly. A ray of demonic light flashed across his eyes as he looked at Yi Xian with boundless battle intent. Hee. Suddenly, a stream of light flashed by quietly. Rock Demon appeared in front of the 4 of them and said with a thought-provoking attitude, If Yi Xian is carrying the celestial extinguishing sword, I'm not sure if he can kill glorious Sun Heavenly Monarch, but he's already in an invincible position. There's no suspense in this battle. Glorious Sun Heavenly Monarch can only escape. But if he's not carrying the celestial extinguishing sword, it's hard to say who will win this battle. As Rock Demon's words fell, the other 4 nodded in agreement. Just as Rock Demon said, Yi Xian could kill glorious Sun Heavenly Monarch aside from the celestial extinguishing sword. With his current depleted cultivation, it would be difficult for him to hold on in this battle. In the center of the Chaos Dojo, glorious Sun Heavenly Monarch's murderous intent soared to the sky. The 9 heavens' divine fire burned fiercely, and the starry sky was distorted to the extreme. Clearly, Yi Xian's disregard for him was a great humiliation. Yi Xian, do you really think you're the master of the 3 realms? The so-called Heavenly Emperor title is nothing but a joke in my eyes. Glorious Sun Heavenly Monarch roared ferociously. Bastard, you talk too much. There were only 7 days left before the 1 year was up. Yi Xian didn't have time to waste on such trash. As soon as he finished speaking, 2 fist radiance swung through the starry sky. The Chaos Dojo exploded violently, as an extremely terrifying great art was born in his hands. Rumble! The sea of stars overturned as a wisp of dark fog surrounded Yi Xian. The immortal light of the great firmament burst out violently. His two-fist radiance was like a great star in the sky, bringing with it the power to destroy the world as it blasted towards Glorious Sun Heavenly Monarch. Kill! Glorious Sun Heavenly Monarch didn't underestimate Yi Xian's terrifying great art at all. Learning from his previous lesson, he directly activated the 9 heavens divine fire. The two-fist radiants were like heavenly fire stars as it violently rushed towards Yi Xian. Bang! 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 The starry skies exploded and meteors fell. When the two of them collided, resplendent immortal light shot out in all directions. There were even several stars, that were millions of li in size, that exploded. The terrifying might the two of them released could be said to be world-destroying. Glorious Sun Heavenly Monarch was at the 8th firmament of Daluo, only one level higher than Sword Immortal Vast Sun, and the others that Yi Xian had killed. However, this one level was like heaven and earth. In the 9 heavens of Grand Luo, each step was a different heavens. It was divided into 3 major watersheds, and in the 3rd watershed, the difference between each heavens was huge. Moreover, the true form of the glorious Sun Star Monarch was an ancient golden crow, which made him an extremely powerful existence. Yi Xian, I was careless and allowed you to sneak attack me. Do you really think I'm no match for you? Glorious Sun Heavenly Monarch roared crazily. He formed a supreme immortal art with both hands. The 9 heavens divine fire shook the starry sky, and turned into a long dragon that kept bombarding Yi Xian. However, he didn't fight Yi Xian physically. As the saying goes, a fall into the pit, a gain in your wit. Whether it was the physical battle with Yi Xian on the starry sky ancient path, or watching Yi Xian's fighting style, Glorious Sun Heavenly Monarch realized that Yi Xian's physical body was extremely terrifying. It wasn't something that he could resist. This also made him avoid fighting Yi Xian physically. Instead, he used a great immortal art to obliterate Yi Xian in the Chaos Dao field. Bang! The great devil fist art pierced through the starry sky, and turned the fire dragon into dust with one punch. Yi Xian took a step forward, and as if he had broken through the barrier of time and space, he suddenly appeared in front of Glorious Sun Heavenly Monarch. His jade-like palm violently slammed down on Glorious Sun Heavenly Monarch's head. Retreat! Drifting Cloud Immortal Trace Void Shift. Glorious Sun Heavenly Monarch's expression changed slightly, and he retreated rapidly, barely dodging Yi Xian's strongest attack. However, fine beads of sweat appeared on his forehead. Impossible! How can he still be so strong? Glorious Sun Heavenly Monarch maintained a safe distance of 50,000 miles from Yi Xian. His body was covered in heavenly fire, but he roared inwardly. If he hadn't dodged in time, he would have been seriously injured by Yi Xian. Unfortunately, before Glorious Sun Heavenly Monarch could recover, Yi Xian gave him a ferocious smile. His pair of sword fingers cut through the starry sky, and a great killing art condensed in the starry sky. Chapter 558. Immortal Imprisoning Finger. The 3 simple words exploded in all directions. Yi Xian's sword finger glowed, and it was as if it had disturbed the heavens and earth. A giant finger condensed in the boundless starry sky, bringing with it an aura that could annihilate all living things as it descended towards Heavenly Monarch Sunday Immortal Imprisoning Finger. It was a killing technique from the forbidden section of the immortal scripture. It had the terrifying power to kill gods and immortals. When Yi Xian displayed this technique, it shocked all the powerful cultivators. Their bodies and minds trembled to the extreme. Heaven and Earth Demon Technique. Facing Yi Xian's ultimate technique, the Heavenly Monarch of the Sun didn't hold back anymore, and directly activated his most powerful technique. His body was burning intensely, and within the heaven-shaking flames, there was even a piercing cry that could pierce through the heavens and earth. Yi Xian is in big trouble, Shintu whispered. The golden crow's true form, and the sun in the sky. Yi Xian can't resist at all. Immortal Wang of the South Pole sneered. Yi Xian, let me see the power of the extinguishing immortal sword. Peng Emo growled again and again. His eyes were shining as he looked at the extinguishing immortal sword behind Yi Xian. The greed in his eyes was no longer concealed. Hung long long. The 9 heavens' divine fire dissipated, and a 3-legged golden crow appeared in the starry sky. It let out a piercing cry that shocked all the powerful cultivators. Its golden wings looked as if they were made of gold. Its bloodthirsty eyes were filled with savagery. Every single one of its golden feathers was like a sword that could split the heavens. Its 3 claws were surrounded by heavenly flames. An exceptionally ferocious aura was being emitted. Roar! The golden crow roared and the sun burned the sky. When the 3-legged golden crow spread its wings, the world within thousands of miles was turned into a burning fire. Yi Xian's immortal imprisoning finger was also crumbling inch by inch until it turned into a wisp of dust. Terrifying, too terrifying. The ancient golden crow was born from the essence of fire of the sun, and could be said to be the favored child of heaven and earth. The heavenly fire of the sun that spread out from its body could burn everything in the world. Even Yi Xian's ultimate skill could not do anything to it. Yi Xian, you brat. Today, your soul will scatter, and you will never be reincarnated. The sun sovereign of heaven let out a ferocious roar. As he spread his wings, his ancient golden crow form soared into the sky. The extremely blooming sun sovereign of heaven's flames made him look like a blazing sun, as he violently pounced on Yi Xian. Rumble! The stars were exploding, and the sea of stars was evaporating. The ancient golden crow flew through the luminous starry sky. When it spread its wings, the stars and meteors were burning, and then exploding in the luminous starry sky. The ancient golden crow's attack was like a blazing sun. Everything in the world would be destroyed under its light. The heavenly fire of the sun was too terrifying. Even Daoyuo Jingxian did not dare to touch it. The sun and moon were the 2 strongest forces in the 3 realms. It just so happened that the ancient golden crow had mastered the power of the sun. This was the true terror of the sun sovereign of heaven. Yi Xian, go to hell. The ancient golden crow's roar shattered the sea of stars. The blazing heavenly fire of the sun burned down the stars. 3 terrifying claws of the golden crow violently clawed at Yi Xian with the power to destroy the world. Bang! The starry sky exploded as heavenly fire burned the plains. Yi Xian was sent flying under the gazes of all the powerful experts. His body seemed to have turned into a meteor, as he crashed into the Chaos Dao field. Bang! The Chaos Dao field was shaking. Yi Xian's falling body created a human-shaped crater in the ground. No one knew if he was dead or alive. Yi Xian lost. Shen Tu whispered as he watched the scene in front of him. Impossible. He hasn't used the Immortal sword yet. Rakimo roared. He did not believe that Yi Xian would be defeated so easily. Heavenly fire of the sun, the power of the sun. Yi Xian has been severely injured by the heavenly fire of the sun. Even if he wants to use the Immortal sword, he won't have the chance. Sword Demon frowned and asserted, This Yi Xian is too arrogant. You should know that the reason the sun sovereign of heaven could run rampant in the 3 realms is because of the power of the heavenly fire of the sun. If he didn't underestimate the sun sovereign of heaven, how could he have ended up like this? Immortal Wang of the South Pole sneered contemptuously. Sigh. Taoist Yellow Spring sighed helplessly. The ancient golden crow is extremely ferocious. Now that the sun sovereign of heaven has gone berserk, I'm afraid he won't let Yi Xian go. As soon as Taoist Yellow Springs finished speaking, the battle changed as expected. Rumble! The golden crow roared in luminous starry sky. The golden crow that blotted out the sky looked down at the Chaos Dao field with its ferocious eyes from the depths of the starry sky. Its ferocious cry shook the starry sky. Great sun burns the heavens. A ferocious voice echoed in luminous starry sky as a golden sun quietly appeared in the starry sky. Time seemed to have stopped and space seemed to have frozen. The golden sun seemed to have become the only thing in the world. When the golden sun fell on the Chaos Dao field, an aura that could destroy all things erupted with a bang. Everything ends here. The sun sovereign of heaven's ferocious voice echoed in all directions. When the golden sun fell on the Chaos Dao field, the starry sky trembled violently. The endless heavenly fire of the sun covered every inch of the Chaos Dao field. Stop! The Empyrean fairy suddenly shouted. Her beautiful face had already turned pale. She had never thought that Yi Xian would be defeated in the first round. Disappointment, unwillingness, and an indescribable sadness. All kinds of complicated emotions appeared in the Empyrean fairy's heart. No matter what, Yi Xian was her first man. Although the Empyrean fairy had no love for Yi Xian, she could not accept watching Yi Xian die tragically in front of her. This was also the reason why the Empyrean fairy had unconsciously scolded him. My apologies, Empyrean fairy, but Yi Xian must die today, because no one can survive the heavenly fire of the sun. In the starry sky, the sun sovereign of heaven returned to his human form. However, his face was extremely pale. Clearly, using the heavenly fire of the sun to kill Yi Xian was a great burden on him. Now that his cultivation had been exhausted, he could no longer fight even if he advanced to the second round. The Empyrean fairy's face turned blank when she heard the sun sovereign of heaven's words. A gloomy chi appeared around her. Just as the sun sovereign of heaven had said, no one could survive the heavenly fire of the sun except a demi-saint. Why are you so useless? Could it be that master guessed wrong? You're not the seventh heaven's destined saint at all? The Empyrean fairy's expression was miserable. Unwillingness and sadness grew in her heart. Her thoughts were in an extreme mess. She hated Yi Xian for being weak and hated Yi Xian even more for bringing her hope, only to be greatly disappointed in the end. Look, what's that? Suddenly, just as the Empyrean fairy's thoughts were in a mess, a cry of surprise was heard. The Empyrean fairy abruptly raised her head and looked at the Chaos Dojo with her starry eyes. In the Chaos Dojo, the heavenly fire of the sun was raging, and the boundless void was collapsing. However, the terrifying heavenly fire of the sun was gradually fading, and a slender figure was emerging. Chapter 559. Yi Xian was dressed in black, and 3,000 strands of black hair hung behind his head. His eyes were slightly closed as he sat cross-legged at the center of the primal chaos Dao field. Terrifying sun heavenly fire coiled around his body, as if it wanted to turn this alien into ashes. But the most frightening thing was that Yi Xian was actually absorbing the destructive heavenly solar fire. The terrifying heavenly solar fire turned into wisps of heavenly solar fire essence, and was constantly being refined into Yi Xian's body. Yi Xian's body was glowing. It was a kind of extreme light. He seemed to have entered an inconceivable state as a golden sun condensed behind him. I'm impossible, the glorious sun sovereign screamed at the scene. No one knew better than him how terrifying the heavenly solar fire was. Apart from the sage-to-be, even a pinnacle grand heavenly immortal would be severely injured if touched by the heavenly solar fire. How could Yi Xian be unharmed in the heavenly solar fire? The most frightening thing for the glorious sun sovereign was that Yi Xian was refining the heavenly solar fire. This was simply unimaginable and subverted his understanding. The glorious sun sovereign was not the only one who was frightened. The expressions of the four strongest people changed drastically. They stared at Yi Xian with solemn horror in their eyes. Whether it was the Eastern Ghost Emperor Shen Tu, the most mysterious Nether Taoist, the Sword Demon, or the Immortal Elder of the South Pole, each of them had their own trump cards. Although they were wary of the heavenly solar fire, they were not overly afraid, and had ways to resist it. But to ask them to refine the heavenly solar fire was simply a fantasy. It was simply an act of seeking death. Silence, silence, a deathly silence. All the powerful experts were horrified and speechless. They stared at Yi Xian's figure, and looked at Yi Xian with unprecedented fear. Yi Xian! The Empyrean fairy cried out excitedly. Her pale face flushed red, proving how excited she was. Hope reappeared in the Empyrean fairy's eyes. At this moment, in the center of the Chaos Dojo, the heavenly sun flame gradually dissipated, and wisps of extreme sun flame essence were refined by Yi Xian, gradually fusing into his body. His skin became even fairer, making people feel dizzy just by looking at him. Rumble! All of a sudden, Yi Xian opened his eyes. His eyes were spinning like chaotic divine lightning. A blood-red mist surrounded his body, and the golden sun behind him merged into his body. Crack! Yi Xian clenched his fists tightly, and an explosive sound came from his knuckles. The space around him exploded from his claw, and a vacuum crack appeared. The strength of his physical body was simply terrifying to an unimaginable extent. Only by refining the true body with heavenly fire could the immortal body be formed. These words fully explained Yi Xian's state just now. In truth, when Yi Xian had taken the form of the ancient golden crow, dazzling heavenly lord had not taken him seriously at all. With his origin immortal body and various arts, killing dazzling heavenly lord was extremely troublesome, but not impossible. But when Yi Xian saw the heavenly sun flame erupting from dazzling heavenly lord's body, he came to a realization and made an extremely bold decision. It was common knowledge that the energies of Supreme Yin and Supreme Yang were two supreme energies. If he could refine the heavenly sun flame into his body, his origin immortal body would definitely take another step forward. Although this method was extremely dangerous, it was worth it for Yi Xian. After all, Yi Xian's intuition was very accurate. This heavenly sun flame would definitely take his origin immortal body to the next level. Yi Xian had gambled correctly. He had purposely acted like he had been defeated, inciting dazzling heavenly lord's killing intent, and allowing him to unleash the heavenly sun flame. This had allowed him to achieve his goal. As the heavenly sun flame tempered Yi Xian's origin immortal body, it gradually advanced toward major completion. By the time he had completely refined the heavenly sun flame, his physical body had reached an inconceivable level of toughness. He was only one step away from reaching major completion. Yi Xian didn't know just how powerful a major completion origin immortal body would be, but he could clearly sense the terrifying energy contained within his body, and he felt an urge to unleash it. Thump, thump, thump. Like the beating of a war drum or a thunderclap of primal chaos, Yi Xian stepped into the sky, each step causing ripples to erupt beneath his feet. The starry sky trembled, and he suppressed all the law energy in the area. Yi Xian, no. Yi Tiandi, you can't kill me, you can't. Dazzling heavenly lord was ghastly pale, his body and mind trembling in fear. He subconsciously began to retreat, because Yi Xian was slowly walking toward him. Dazzling heavenly lord was no fool. On the contrary, he was extremely intelligent, or else he wouldn't have patiently waited for Yi Xian to suffer a round of attrition before attacking Yi Xian. But dazzling heavenly lord had never imagined that even after using all his tricks, he still wouldn't be able to kill Yi Xian. After using the heavenly sun flame, he had less than 10% of his cultivation left. So how could he be a match for Yi Xian? Moreover, dazzling heavenly lord had a very strong premonition that even if he was at his peak, the only outcome for him against Yi Xian was death. Fellow Taoists, save me! Dazzling heavenly lord cried out for help, his voice trembling. But no one would block Yi Xian for dazzling heavenly lord. That would be suicidal. Run! There was no hesitation, no desire to fight Yi Xian to the death. Dazzling heavenly lord's only thought at this moment was to run. Rumble! Golden crows howled and crimson light flashed. Dazzling heavenly lord used his essence blood art, drawing on his greatest potential, and transforming into a crimson streak of light to leave the 33rd heaven. You want to leave? Do you think you can? Yi Xian's malicious voice reverberated through the starry sky. He didn't seem to have made any movements. But with just a single step, the terrifying Daluo immortal body glowed as it broke through the barrier of space and blocked the path of the heavenly monarch of the sun. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust. Let it all end here. Yi Xian calmly spoke, and as he thrust out his palm, the luminous star field rumbled and trembled. A domineering energy circulated through the starry sky, exerting itself on dazzling heavenly lord's body and imprisoning him in space by Yi Xian. Empress Nuwa, save me! Dazzling heavenly lord screamed as the terror of life and death assaulted him. He even begged the saint for help. But Nuwa remained motionless in the depths of space. She didn't respond at all. Bang! Yi Xian laughed sinisterly. The Daluo immortal body was glowing, and the giant palm that held up the sky slapped down on the sun heavenly monarch's head, instantly causing his body to explode into a bloody mist. Even his primordial spirit was destroyed inch by inch in the starry sky. All was silent, and not a sound could be heard. When the brilliant Star Lord was blasted apart by Yi Xian in the starry sky, the various experts were deathly silent. They only looked at Yi Xian with a trace of fear in their eyes. Chapter 560. What a terrifying physique. Below the field, Immortal Wang of the South Pole frowned with a heavy expression. However, if one listened carefully, one would notice that there was a tremor in his voice, proving that he was not calm. This is getting interesting. Shintu smiled coldly. However, a solemn look flashed across his eyes when he looked at Yi Xian. Obviously, he had a new understanding of Yi Xian's combat strength. Sword Demon and Yellow Spring Taoist were silent, but their auras were slightly chaotic. No one knew what they were thinking. In the luminous sun-starry sky, outside the 33rd heaven, Yi Xian looked calm, as if killing Heavenly Monarch's son was just a trivial matter. He was not moved at all. Yi Xian walked down the starry sky and stood in the center of the Chaos Dojo again. There were only 3 days left until the 1-year period was up. Until now, no one dared to step onto the Chaos Dojo. Even though there were hundreds of great divines, and some 8th heavenly layer grand heavenly layer hidden among them, no one dared to take the risk for fear of following in Heavenly Monarch's son's footsteps. Clang! When the 1-year period was up, the bell rang. At this point, the last spot was in Yi Xian's pocket. There was no more disturbance. When Yi Xian walked down from the Primal Chaos Dao Plaza, the rock demon welcomed him with a face full of smiles. He even said some words of praise to Yi Xian. There were even some great golden immortals who smiled at Yi Xian and lowered their posture to the extreme as they warmly greeted him. The strong were as heavy as mountains and the weak were like ants. This was the unchanging law of heaven and earth. The strong were always respected, and Yi Xian fully demonstrated what it meant to be strong. Yi Xian smiled and nodded in response to the Daoyuo Jinxian's goodwill. After all, he was now the celestial emperor of the 3 realms. If he could recruit some great divines to join the celestial court, it would be beneficial to him. Clang! Clang! The bell rang 3 more times, and the old woman appeared in the Primal Chaos Dojo again. The first round of selection is over. 16 fellow Taoists have emerged victorious. You only have 7 days to rest. After 7 days, the second round will begin. Rumble. The stars moved and the world changed. The chaotic Tao field disappeared. All the powerful cultivators left and waited for the second round to begin 7 days later. Stars filled the sky, and the palace had no roof. Yi Xian sat cross-legged in the center of the training ground. Starlight sprinkled down from the sky, illuminating him, as if he was untainted by the dust of the past. At a glance, he gave off a feeling of transcendence. Inhale, inhale, exhale, inhale. Yi Xian sat cross-legged as he breathed in and out. Streams of immortal light pulsed from his mouth and nose, causing the space around him to slightly distort. He was cultivating the undying immortal scripture and inspecting his origin immortal physique. He wanted to know how far his origin immortal physique had advanced under the sun's heavenly fire. Bang! The air exploded and the waterfall dissipated. Yi Xian slowly opened his eyes, and the all-heaven immortal light around him dissipated. However, when he opened and closed his eyes, an indifferent and emotionless expression quietly flashed through his eyes. Yi Xian calmly said, "The mighty Empyrean fairy, and the disciple of a saint, actually peeped on someone else's cultivation. Is this not beneath your status as an Empyrean fairy?" Humph. A cold snort came from outside as the Empyrean fairy strode in. She was dressed in white, and her black hair was tied up in a bun. Her skin was as white as jade, and she exuded a breathtaking aura that made one not dare to profane her. "I came openly, so when did I peep on you?" The mysterious maiden of the 9 heavens had an arrogant expression on her face. Her voice was slightly cold as she looked at Yi Xian in a condescending manner. "You hid outside the hall for 2 hours. If this isn't peeping, then what is?" Yi Xian looked at the Empyrean fairy. His voice was calm and emotionless, but when the Empyrean fairy heard it, she blushed. She didn't know how to retort to Yi Xian. In truth, the Empyrean fairy didn't know why she had peeped on Yi Xian. Perhaps it was because Yi Xian had given her too great of a shock today, that she had unconsciously come to Yi Xian's training ground and become extremely curious about Yi Xian. Whether it was a mortal woman or a fairy from the 9 heavens, aside from the difference in their levels of life, they were both women. When a woman became curious about a man, it was a sign that she was about to fall for him. Today, the Empyrean fairy thought that Yi Xian was dead for sure, and would be burned to ashes by the heavenly sunfire. When the Empyrean fairy had fallen into despair, Yi Xian had emerged unscathed. Instead, he had blown up brilliant Sun Emperor in the starry sky. This huge contrast made the Empyrean fairy's heart churn. Niwa had once told her that Yi Xian could be the seventh destined saint. That made her think that Yi Xian was good enough for her. She had high hopes for Yi Xian. However, when Yi Xian was about to be defeated by the heavenly monarch of the sun, the hope in the nine heavens maiden's heart was instantly shattered. However, after Yi Xian refined the sun Tai fire and killed the heavenly monarch of the sun, her hope was reignited. The Empyrean fairy's heart was in turmoil. It was like a century had passed. It made her very curious about Yi Xian. She was certain that Yi Xian was the seventh destined saint. But the Empyrean fairy was a very proud woman. She had the right to be proud. She had a born Taoism aptitude. She was born from the spirit of heaven and earth. She was also Niwa's last disciple. When all these things were added together, she never thought much of any man in the three realms. Until Yi Xian insulted her innocence and personally came to participate in this grand gathering to marry her. This caused the nine heavens' profound maiden to feel even more proud. Yi Xian, don't forget that you came to this event of your own accord. You wanted to marry me. Now you're acting so indifferent to me. Don't you think it's funny? The Empyrean fairy said proudly. She hoped that Yi Xian would understand her current status. Hearing the Empyrean fairy's words, Yi Xian laughed. He really laughed, but his laughter was very contemptuous. He stood up in the air and walked slowly toward the Empyrean fairy. Thump, thump, thump. Yi Xian's footsteps were very light, but they made the Empyrean fairy's heart tremble. Her breathing became a little ragged. She didn't know why Yi Xian was walking toward her. What are you doing? The mysterious maiden of the nine heavens unconsciously took a few steps back. Her cold face flushed red, and she bit her lips as she looked at Yi Xian. Her heart was beating violently, and she unconsciously revealed the appearance of a little woman. At this moment, Yi Xian strolled toward the Empyrean fairy. The two of them were less than a fist's distance apart. An extremely masculine scent rushed toward the Empyrean fairy, making her blush even more. Her starry eyes didn't dare to meet Yi Xian's gaze. An extremely ambiguous atmosphere grew between the two of them. A strange smile appeared on Yi Xian's face. As the Empyrean fairy panicked, Yi Xian slowly raised his right hand and stroked the Empyrean fairy's cheek. Chapter 561. When Yi Xian caressed her cheeks, the Empyrean fairy immediately felt soft and itchy. This feeling was like an electric shock, causing her delicate body to heat up and her heart to pound violently. No, don't. Suddenly, Yi Xian grabbed her hair and tasted her sweetness in a domineering and greedy manner. The Empyrean fairy felt as if she had been struck by lightning. Her entire body froze on the spot, as if she had fallen into a dream. However, she could only make a soft sound of rejection. Although this sound seemed to be rejecting him, there was a hint of eagerness in it. It was only resistance at first, but then she became completely intoxicated and limp in Yi Xian's arms. This period of time was not long, but to the Empyrean fairy, it felt as long as a century. Her eyes were blurred, and her white jade-like neck was suffused with a spring red color. Suddenly, the Empyrean fairy cried out in pain, instantly waking her up from her intoxication. Yi Xian also pushed her away at this moment. However, the Empyrean fairy's cherry lips had been bitten open, and traces of blood kept flowing out. The salty taste of blood filled her mouth. Painful, very painful. Yi Xian had bitten open her cherry lips. This caused the Empyrean fairy to be stunned on the spot. A trace of moisture appeared in her eyes, and she looked at Yi Xian with clenched teeth. All kinds of complicated emotions flashed across her eyes. Confusion, shyness, indignation, and a trace of intoxication. When these emotions grew in her heart, she looked at Yi Xian with an extremely complicated gaze. Shameless. After a full 10 breaths of time, the Empyrean fairy cried out in shame and indignation. Shameless. Yi Xian smiled evilly, but his gaze towards the Empyrean fairy gradually became fierce. Empyrean fairy, I didn't force you. This is all voluntary. How can you say that I'm shameless? Yi Xian said softly. Then bite me. The moment the Empyrean fairy said those words, she regretted it. Her face became extremely red, and it was obvious that she could not spit out such shameful words. Unfortunately, Yi Xian did not seem to notice the shame and indignation on the Empyrean fairy's face. He looked down at the woman with his hands behind his back, and said in a calm and cold voice, I want you to remember that you are my woman. Yi Xian, no matter how proud you are, you'd better put away your ignorant pride in front of me. Otherwise, the next time I'll teach you how to be a good wife and mothers. Yi Xian, you're despicable and shameless. You're a shameless bastard. The mysterious maiden of the 9 heavens clenched her fists tightly as she scolded Yi Xian. Then, she activated her immortal light and instantly disappeared from the hall. However, her embarrassed and indignant voice still echoed in the hall. Looking at the Empyrean fairy's back, Yi Xian's expression did not change. He said in a clear and cold voice, What an ignorant and arrogant woman. I hope you'll change after you become the Queen Mother. Otherwise, don't blame me, Yi Xian, for not taking into account our relationship as husband and wife. In the Niwa Palace, the Empyrean fairy's face was full of shame and indignation. She kept cursing Yi Xian. What she had just experienced was too embarrassing for her to recall. However, the man's breath on her lips and the taste of blood on her body made her heart ripple. Sigh, it's hard to overcome the tribulation of love. A long sigh echoed in the depths of the Niwa Palace. However, the Empyrean fairy could not hear it. It was clearly the voice of the Saint Niwa. She seemed to have seen the future of her disciple. Even though she was a saint, she felt somewhat helpless. Everyone below the saint level was an ant. However, saints were also below the heavenly Tao. They were also held hostage by the heavenly Tao. Even if they knew that something was going to happen, they were powerless to change it. Perhaps this was the helplessness of a saint. 7 days passed in the blink of an eye. When the Chaos Dojo opened again, all the great divines gathered here, ready to watch the battle between the 16 great divines. Yi Xian, Rock Demon, Shen Tu, Taoist Nether, Sword Demon, and Immortal Elder of the South Pole were the 6 strongest people. As for the other 10 victors, the lowest cultivation was at the 7th heavenly layer of Grand Luo. There were even existences at the 8th heavenly layer of Grand Luo, who were not inferior to the glorious Sun Lord of Heaven. Clearly, among the 16 victors who stood out in the first round, every one of them was extraordinary. All of them had their own great divines, and their combat strength could be said to be at the peak of perfection. The second round began very quickly. It was decided by drawing lots. The victors and losers would be determined in pairs, and the 8 victors would enter the third round. It was impossible to cheat in the drawing of lots, because a saint was present. If anyone dared to do anything under the gaze of a saint, it would be no different from courting death. Soon the 16 great divines drew lots one by one. When it was Yi Xian's turn to draw lots, he drew the number 1. This also meant that his opponent was the one who drew the number 16. When the 16 great divines drew their numbers one by one, they quickly determined their opponents. Something interesting happened. Yi Xian, Rock Demon, Shen Tu, Taoist Nether, Sword Demon, and Immortal Elder of the South Pole were not matched in the second round. They were matched against ordinary Daoyuo Jingxian, which left their opponents bitter. After the 18 consecutive bell tolls, the first to go up was Taoist Nether. His opponent was a great fiendish demon, at the 7th heavenly layer of Grand Luo, the Tongtian. As expected, the Nether Spring Taoist heavily injured his opponent, but he didn't kill his opponent, because even though the Nether Spring Taoist demon was only at the 7th level of the Golden Immortal Realm, he was still a figure at the 3rd watershed, and the process of killing him would be extremely long. Shen Tu won, Sword Demon won, Immortal Elder of the South Pole won, and Rock Demon won. When it was Yi Xian's turn, his opponent was an orthodox Daoyuo Jingxian. He did not even enter the arena and directly surrendered. Clearly, the scene of Yi Xian killing Heavenly Lord Sun Glorious Sun had cast a shadow in the hearts of the various great divines. This also made Yi Xian's opponent aware of his own limitations, and directly gave up on the battle. Soon, The 6 great divines left the arena one by one and successfully advanced to the third round. Although the remaining 2 battles were very intense, the 6 of them did not have the leisure to watch. This was because the 6 of them knew that the battle between them was the highlight. They also viewed each other as great enemies. As the bell tolled, the list of the victors of the second round was announced. Yi Xian and the other 5 advanced to the top 8. The remaining 2 victors were existences at the 8th heavenly layer of Grand Luo. Taoist Qing Yuan's true form was an ancient Qing Yuan. His Qing Yuan heavenly fire could be said to be terrifying. It allowed him to advance to the top 8 in 2 consecutive rounds. This showed how powerful his cultivation was. As for the last person, he was a little interesting. He was shrouded in black mist, and no one could see his appearance clearly. Judging from his aura, he should be an evil immortal. Anyone who fought him would be killed by him. His methods could be said to be extremely strange. He was known as the Myriad Spell Lord. Chapter 562. However, be it Rock Demon or Yi Xian, none of the powerful experts present had ever heard of the name Myriad Law True Lord. It was as if such a character had never existed in the world. Soon, the second round ended and the third round began. 1 against 8, 2 against 7, 3 against 6, 4 against 5. The winners and losers would advance to the top 4. The 8 contestants drew their lots one after another. As they displayed the lots they drew, they quickly determined their opponents for the next round. Something interesting happened. Yi Xian's opponent was none other than Rock Demon, who was traveling with him. This also caused Rock Demon's expression to freeze. Then his eyes slightly rotated. It was unknown what he was thinking. Shen Tu against Sword Demon, Yellow Spring Taoist against Taoist Qing Yuan, and Immortal Elder of the South Pole against Myriad Law True Lord. A total of 4 matches were determined. In the luminous starry sky, the stars were spread out. The boundless sea of stars was churning, and the chaos Dao field was rising. All the powerful experts were watching from outside. Clang! As the sound of a bell reverberated in the chaos Dao field, the first match officially began. The first match, Yi Xian versus Rock Demon. Everyone was watching with surging emotions. All the powerful experts focused their attention on the two, because an earth-shattering battle was bound to happen from the start of the top 8. It was also a battle between peak grand heavenly immortals. It could be said that it was rare to see such a battle even after countless years. Peak grand heavenly immortals were revered as ancestors. They were the strongest existences below the quasi-saint realm. It was a great opportunity for all the powerful experts to be able to watch such a battle. Rumble! Yi Xian took a step forward and stood in the center of the chaos Dao field. He stood calmly with his hands behind his back, waiting for Rock Demon to come down and fight him. Rock Demon's face was gloomy, but he still walked towards the chaos Dao field under the gazes of all the powerful experts. He quietly stood opposite Yi Xian. Rock Demon is sinister and ruthless. His methods are extremely cruel. Legend has it that a quasi-saint chased him for millions of miles, but he still managed to escape. He's an extremely difficult character to deal with even among the 9 heavens of grand heavenly immortals. In my opinion, although Yi Tiandi's battle prowess is heaven-defying, I'm afraid he's no match for a ferocious person like Rock Emo. Fellow Taoist, you're right. Yi Tiandi is nothing more than a rising star. Even though his talent is unparalleled since ancient times, it doesn't bode well for him against Rock Demon. All sorts of discussions rang out as the various great experts were discussing Yi Xian and Yi Xian. Clearly, the majority favored Rock Devil. After all, Rock Devil had an illustrious battle record, and his ferocious reputation had spread through the world for countless years. He was definitely not someone that Yi Xian could compare to. At the center of the primal chaos Dao field, Yi Xian indifferently stood there, his origin immortal body faintly glowing. A heaven-like energy swirled around him, and he looked at the Rock Devil with an extremely calm gaze. Haha! Suddenly, just as the various great divine abilities were paying attention to this battle, Rock Demon laughed wildly in the center of the primal chaos Dao field. He even bowed to Yi Xian under the astonished gazes of the 8 great divine abilities. Big Brother Yi is the celestial emperor of the 3 realms, so how could this little brother be a match for Big Brother? Isn't today's battle between us brothers the same as a flood rushing against the Dragon King's temple? Rock Devil lowered himself to the extreme, and there was a fawning smile on his face. There was no sign of him wanting to fight Yi Xian at all. This little brother is untalented and cannot possibly be a match for big brother Yi. This little brother forfeits. The Rock Devil gave a fawning smile, and under the flabbergasted gazes of all the experts, he forfeited and took a step out of the primal chaos Dao Plaza. It was clear that he truly had no intention of fighting Yi Xian, let alone the various experts. Even Yi Xian was taken aback, and a hint of confusion flashed through his eyes as he looked at the Rock Devil. Even though the Rock Devil had lowered himself to the extreme, and even addressed him as Big Brother, Yi Xian had never underestimated the Rock Devil. This was because Yi Xian knew that when a peak Grand Immortal was able to throw away their dignity, and even lower themselves, such people were undoubtedly the most terrifying. However, Yi Xian could not understand why the Rock Devil had shown such goodwill towards him. Could it be that he was only after the God's End sword? After all, the God's End sword was Tongtian's treasure. Even if the Rock Devil had maliciously ambushed him and obtained the God's End sword, how could the Tongtian let him off? Yi Xian could not understand the Rock Devil's intentions, but he did not think about it anymore. This was because Yi Xian knew that no matter what the Rock Devil's intentions were, they would be revealed sooner or later, so it was pointless for him to think about it. The first battle ended with a strong start and a weak finish, and it simply caused the various experts to be extremely disappointed. On the other hand, Yi Xian smoothly advanced to the next round and directly left the chaotic Dao grounds. How could I dare to fight Big Brother? If I really made a move against Big Brother, then wouldn't I be asking for humiliation? The Rock Devil smiled flatteringly, and even flattered Yi Xian, and he completely disregarded the gazes of disdain from the various experts. A worthy younger brother is being so accommodating. Big Brother doesn't deserve it. If a worthy younger brother needs Big Brother's help in the future, then Big Brother will definitely help a worthy younger brother, if it's within the scope of Big Brother's ability. Yi Xian put on a fake smile, and was feigning civility with the Rock Devil. Both of them were extremely shrewd figures, and had many things in common. They were both vicious, merciless, and sinister. At this moment, they were conversing warmly, and it caused the various experts to watch speechlessly. Clang! The bell rang and reverberated in all directions. The second round of the competition began, and it also caused Yi Xian and the Rock Devil to stop their conversation and look towards the chaotic Dao grounds. The second round was between the Nether Taoist and the Green Phoenix Taoist. Rumble! The starry sky shook and the void collapsed. The Green Phoenix Taoist was a terrifying existence in the 8th heaven of Grand Heavenly Realm. Although he was not as strong as the glorious Sun Lord of Heaven, he was not much weaker. When he entered the stage, the Green Phoenix heavenly fire that filled the sky whistled through the starry sky, and its terrifying power was undoubtedly displayed. The Nether Taoist. He still had the same old appearance. His body was stooped, and his whole body emitted a withered look. Only a wisp of murky yellow light twined around his body, giving off an extremely mysterious feeling. Cough, cough, cough. The Nether Taoist strolled into the arena, as if he did not see the terrifying power that was being emitted from the Green Phoenix Taoist. Only his old and hoarse voice reverberated in the chaotic Dao grounds. You are no match for me. Withdraw. As Taoist Yellow Springs spoke, Taoist Blue Phoenix's face chilled. Blue Phoenix celestial flame howled through the starry sky as the origin immortal art condensed in his hands. He glared at Taoist Yellow Springs with fierce killing intent. What a joke! You want me to admit defeat? Are you dreaming? The Green Phoenix Taoist coldly growled. Little Green Phoenix, you overestimate yourself. Since you insist on seeking death, this humble Taoist can only send you on your way. The Nether Taoist helplessly shook his head. He did not release any terrifying power as he walked step by step toward the Green Phoenix Taoist. But in the chaotic Dao grounds, the sound of water could be heard, and the starry sky strangely darkened. Chapter 563. This Taoist Qing Wan is dead for sure. Outside the arena, Rakimo said gloomily, Taoist Huang Quan is an extremely mysterious figure in our underworld. He lives in seclusion in the depths of the Yellow Spring all year round. Even this emperor doesn't dare to say that he can completely defeat him. This little Qing Wan is dead for sure. Shen Tu crossed his arms and directly made the judgment. Hearing the two's words, Yi Xian narrowed his eyes and stared at Taoist Huang Quan. A deep look appeared in his eyes before he slowly nodded. He knew that Mo and Shen Tu were right. This Taoist Qing Wan was no match for Taoist Huang Quan. Heavenly fire slaughters immortals. The heavenly fire blue one whistled through the starry sky. The blue and white flames burned the void. Taoist Qing Wan directly used his most powerful technique and transformed into the true form of the ancient Wan. He swooped down at Taoist Huang Quan with a world-destroying killing intent. The ancient Wan was born from fire. Legend had it that he had the bloodline of the phoenix. He was definitely not an ordinary person and had extremely terrifying strength. Not to mention, he was in existence at the 8th heavenly layer of Grand Heavenly Realm. This made Taoist Qing Wan even more terrifying. Up in the sky and down in the Yellow Spring, I can't see you anywhere. Hua hua hua. Sutras were chanted in the void as the Yellow Spring surged. The world suddenly changed as the terrifying sound of waves came from the void. A murky yellow river was born in the starry sky. The murky yellow waves blotted out the sky and covered the earth, immediately covering the entire primal chaos Dao field. Extinction. When Taoist Huang Quan pointed his finger, the water of the Yellow Spring poured down. The so-called heavenly fire blue Wan was extinguished. The aura that could bury all things bloomed in the primal chaos Dao field. Taoist Qing Wan frantically retreated as the Yellow Spring invaded his body and destroyed his Yuan spirit. His face was extremely pale, and cold sweat appeared on his forehead. Extreme fear rose in his heart. I admit defeat. Taoist Qing Wan fled in a sorry state. The water of the Yellow Spring submerged his knees and turned his legs into bones. His mournful begging voice echoed in the primal chaos Dao field. Wang. Taoist Yellow Spring nodded slowly. When he pointed with his finger, the water of the Yellow Spring dissipated, and the world calmed down once again. However, Taoist Green Phoenix was panting heavily. He looked at Taoist Yellow Spring with great fear. He didn't say anything unnecessary and bowed to Taoist Yellow Spring before leaving the Primal Chaos Dojo. The water of the Yellow Springs was so terrifying. These simple words explained the terror of the Netherworld Taoist. It made the great divines keep quiet out of fear. They looked at the Netherworld Taoist with fear in their eyes. The water of the Yellow Springs can bury all things. It's filled with the law of the 6 paths of reincarnation. This person is indeed someone. Yi Xian muttered to himself as a wisp of admiration appeared in his eyes. Yi Xian was a very proud person. To be praised by him. This also proved that the cultivation of the Yellow Spring Taoist was absolutely terrifying. At this point, Taoist Yellow Spring won and successfully advanced to the next round. Clang! The bell rang, and the third battle officially began. Shenshu vs. Sword Demon. Rumble! Sword Demon took a step forward. His entire body seemed to have turned into a sword that could split the sky, as he stood in the center of the Chaos Dojo. The fallen demon sword that was stabbed diagonally behind him was wrapped by a black cloth, as the Tongtian sword hummed loudly. Thump! 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 Een light blotted out the sky as a ghostly fog filled the air. Shen Tu stepped through the starry sky, and with every step he took, ripples bloomed under his feet, distorting the starry sky slightly. He exuded the majesty of a supreme ghost emperor of the underworld, giving off an urge to prostrate themselves before him. The peak confrontation in the Chaos Dojo. All the great divines were excited as they stared at the two of them without blinking. Everyone knew that an evenly matched battle was about to begin. The Sword Demon only had one battle in his life. However, this battle made all the great divines familiar with him, because it was the battle with Mahamayuri. Kong Xian was the first peacock since the creation of the world. His 5-colored divine light was earth-shattering. Even among the peak Grand Heavenly Realm, he was an extremely terrifying figure. The Sword Demon was able to fight him. Although he was defeated in the end, it showed how terrifying the Sword Demon's cultivation was. Shenshu was one of the 5 ghost emperors of the underworld. He was known as the Ghost Emperor of the East. He commanded hundreds of millions of Yin soldiers and ghost generals. The 10 kings of hell bowed to him. Other than the emperor of Feng Du of the underworld, he could be considered a supreme figure. When these two terrifying figures confronted each other, the atmosphere in the Chaos Dojo was extremely oppressive even before they started fighting. Sword Demon, you're no match for this emperor. Retreat, Shenshu said calmly. You're just a ghost emperor. I'll kill you with one strike. The Sword Demon said coldly. He didn't waste any time talking nonsense. His tone was extremely sharp. With just you, Shenshu sneered. As one of the 5 great ghost emperors of the underworld, his ghost Dao divine powers were superb. Unless a quasi-saint was here, he wouldn't put anyone in his eyes. Why are you talking so much nonsense? Let's fight. The Sword Demon wasn't good with words. When he pointed his sword and sliced through the starry sky, the luminous starry sky exploded. 100,000 li-long sword light shot up into the sky. The demonic sword light that could destroy the heavens and earth slashed directly at Shenshu. Insignificant skill. Shenshu pointed his palm at the sky. The Yin souls howled in anger, and the undead screamed. A sky-covering dark light rippled out. A giant ghost hand condensed in the starry sky and grabbed at the Sword Demon, with a terrifying force that could destroy mountains and rivers. Pung! The starry sky exploded. When the two powerful forces collided, the demonic sword light and the sky-covering dark light violently collided, causing the Chaos Dojo to shake violently. Kill! The Sword Demon pointed his sword at the sky. His body was unparalleled. When he took a step forward, the entire starry sky shook violently as he charged at Shenshu. The ghost finger pointed again and again. The dark light flashed and Shenshu shot out chains of gods and ghosts. The terrifying and gloomy chains wrapped around the Sword Demon, with an aura that could destroy one's soul. Clang! Clang! It was like a divine mountain had exploded into pieces and the heavens and the earth were collapsing. Sword lights that covered the sky whistled through the sky while the chains of gods and ghosts moved about freely. 2 peak golden immortals were in complete battle, and the terrifying might they emanated was simply impossible to look straight at. Clang! Clang! From the ground to the starry sky, and from the starry sky to the ground. With the Chaos Dojo as the epicenter, the two fought fiercely, causing this earth-shattering battle to reach its climax. Divine ghost traceless, all things perish. Shenshu stepped out with the ghost steps. His body turned illusory, as he barely dodged the Sword Demon's sword. 18 divine ghost chains shot out, and tore through the boundless starry sky, instantly binding the Sword Demon like a dumpling. In the starry sky, dark light covered the sky. Shenshu controlled the 18 divine ghost chains. The terrifying dark light rippled out and bound the Sword Demon tightly. He was already in a great advantage. On the other hand, the Sword Demon was bound by the divine ghost chains. Clang! 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 The divine ghost chains can destroy one's yuan spirit and trap one's physical body. As long as you admit defeat now, this emperor can spare your life, Shenshu growled coldly. Fallen Demon Sword. The Sword Demon smiled ferociously. With a roar that could shatter the starry sky, something extremely terrifying happened. Clang! 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 The Tongtian sword pierced through the earth, destroying the past and present. As the cries of the Tongtian sword rang out, the space-time in this area seemed to be in chaos. Spatial cracks appeared as a wisp of demonic light bloomed around the Sword Demon. Swish! The fallen demon's sword that was stabbed diagonally behind Sword Demon shot out. A demonic light that could pierce through the 3 realms of heaven, earth and man bloomed. The terrifying demonic sword chi swept across the universe. The so-called chains of gods and ghosts collapsed inch by inch around Sword Demon. Chapter 564. Zheng. The fallen demon sword cut across the starry sky, its demonic light cutting through the stars. Tens of thousands of sword lights whistled through the air, as the dazzling and tyrannical sword light blasted towards Shin Tuesday. Dang dang dang. Like a shower of falling stars, the fallen demon sword light drowned out Shin Tu's demonic light, directly destroying the demonic light around him. With a loud bang that shook the starry sky, Shen Tu fell towards the primal chaos Dao field like a kite with its string cut. Pung! With a loud bang, the battlefield shook as Shen Tu smashed into the primal chaos Dao field. Zhou Sen's demonic light dissipated, making it impossible to tell whether he was dead or alive. Zheng zheng zheng. Heaven and earth were boundless. The demonic sword whistled through the air, and the humming of the sword resonated in the sky. The boundless starry sky trembled violently. Sword Demon stepped through the starry sky and walked toward the chaotic Dao field. A sword as black as ink flew around him, making him look even more imposing. No one could look at him directly. A trivial ghost emperor can't even withstand a single blow. The sword light was chaotic as it tore through the void. Sword Demon took a step forward and appeared in the middle of the primal chaos Dao field, his eyes cold and sharp. Kakik! Suddenly, a gloomy and eerie laughter rang out as Shen Tu slowly climbed up from the ground. A gloomy and strange black fog rose from his body, as a pair of blood-red eyes glowed in the black fog. The cries of tens of thousands of dead souls resounded from Shen Tu's body. The fallen demon sword? Shen Tu sneered. Do you think you can defeat this emperor with this demonic sword? You're still too inexperienced. Shen Tu roared as the black fog around him bloomed to the extreme, instantly covering the entire primal chaos Dao field as the cries of dead souls reverberated in all directions. 8 Ghosts Diagram, Heavenly Ghost Howl. Pung pung pung. Astral winds howled as the demonic fog filled the sky. Shen Tu roared again and again as the primal chaos Dao field exploded violently. The 8 gates were pitch black like ink, and each gate was tens of thousands of feet tall. When the 8 ghost gates rotated in the starry sky, the space-time of the region seemed to distort, and an extremely terrifying aura emanated from the 8 ghost gates. 8 Ghosts Diagram. Outside the arena, the Netherworld Taoist cried out in shock. His originally stooped figure began to straighten up, and a hint of seriousness appeared in his eyes as he looked at the 8 ghost gates. What is the 8 Ghosts Diagram? Peng Mo asked curiously. Obviously, he didn't know much about the Ghost Dao divine abilities, but he also knew that the divine ability Shen Tu was using at this moment was extremely terrifying. Otherwise, how could Taoist Huang Quan be so serious? 8 Ghosts Diagram, Sky Ghost Howl. Taoist Huang Quan enunciated each word clearly. He was silent for 3 breaths before he continued. This is a great supernatural power of the Ghost Dao. It can summon the 8 great heavenly ghosts to the world. They specialize in destroying people's primordial spirits and ignore all material attacks. They can kill people without a trace. Even though Sword Demon has the fallen demon sword, he's definitely not Shen Tu's opponent. Destroy a person's primordial spirit? Rock Devilrock cried out in horror. A serious look appeared in his eyes. As everyone knew, among the 3 realms of heaven, earth and man, the most important thing was the primordial spirit. Be it fiendish demons, ghost immortals, or even immortals, it was the same. If one's primordial spirit was destroyed, they would truly die. They wouldn't even have the chance to reincarnate. No matter what kind of supernatural power it was, any technique that could destroy a person's primordial spirit was considered one of the top supernatural powers in the 3 realms. At this moment, Shen Tu was using the 8 Ghosts Diagram. Sword Demon would definitely suffer a life or death calamity. Ha! Suddenly, a chuckle sounded, waking Rock Devilrock up. He looked for the source of the chuckle, and saw that it came from Yi Xian. Big brother, what are you laughing about? Rock Devilrock's eyes turned as he probed softly. Rock Devilrock wasn't the only one who was puzzled. Taoist Huang Quan also looked at Yi Xian. Clearly, like Rock Devilrock, he didn't know why Yi Xian was laughing. As if he sensed the doubts in their hearts, Yi Xian calmly looked at Sword Demon in the Chaos Dao field. He said in a strange voice, "The 8 Ghosts Diagram is indeed powerful. If it were anyone else, they might have suffered a life or death crisis. Unfortunately, Shen Tu's opponent is Sword Demon. The 8 Ghosts Diagram is completely useless against him." Rock Devilrock and Taoist Huang Quan were stunned when they heard Yi Xian's words. They clearly couldn't understand what Yi Xian meant. Why would he so easily determine that the 8 Ghosts Diagram was useless against Sword Demon? Suddenly, a cold snort sounded. Immortal Wang of the South Pole sneered in the distance. Yi Xian, how long have you been cultivating? How would you know how terrifying the 8 ghosts diagram is? Yi Xian didn't even bother to look at Immortal Wang of the South Pole's disdain, let alone argue with him. Suddenly, before Rock Devil Rock and Taoist Huang Quan could ask Yi Xian another question, the Chaos Dao field had already changed, causing everyone to look at it again. Chaos Dao field. Roar. The heavenly ghosts howled and gloomy light filled the air. 8 ghost gates buzzed and rotated as 8 heavenly ghosts walked out from the gates. Their bodies were shrouded in black fog, and their bloodshot eyes stared ferociously at the sword demon. Heavenly ghosts devour souls. Shen Tu's hair fluttered wildly in the wind as his roar resounded through the starry sky. His hands formed a seal as 8 heavenly ghosts roared through the starry sky. They turned into 8 ghostly faces and lunged toward Sword Demon in a frenzy. Slash. A pair of sword fingers streaked across the starry sky as Sword Demon formed a sword seal. The fallen demon's sword glowed brightly and emitted a Tongtian sword hum as it slashed at the 8 heavenly ghosts with a sword wave that spanned 100,000 li rumble. The sea of stars churned, and meteorites exploded. The fallen demon's sword was too terrifying, especially in the hands of the sword demon. It displayed a power that could destroy the world. But when the fallen demon's sword fell on the 8 sky ghosts, something extremely strange happened. The 8 heavenly ghosts were unharmed, as they shuttled through the 100,000 li sword wave with ease. How were they hurt? The 8 group's heavenly ghost does not exist in the material world, nor does it exist in the void. All attacks in the material world are useless against the 8 group's heavenly ghost. Shen Tu laughed wildly. His eyes filled with contempt as he looked at Sword Demon. Go! Shen Tu formed a supreme ghost seal, and 8 heavenly ghosts roared ferociously. They instantly appeared above Sword Demon's head, giving him no time to dodge. The 8 heavenly ghosts instantly invaded Sword Demon's body, and the extremely terrifying ghostly fog completely covered Sword Demon. Sword Demon lost. Outside the arena, Taoist Yellow Spring shook his head helplessly. His Yuan spirit would definitely be devoured after being invaded by the 8 ghosts. It was a death sentence. It's a pity that Sword Demon went up against Shen Tu, the Ghost Emperor of the Underworld. If he was an immortal, how could he have suffered such a calamity? Rock Demon sighed. Humph. In the distance, Immortal Wang of the South Pole snorted in disdain. He glanced at Yi Xian and said, "Who was it that said the 8 ghosts were useless against Sword Demon? Looks like it was a stupid joke." At this moment, Yi Xian's expression was calm, as he indifferently looked at the Sword Demon that was being devoured by the 8 division heavenly ghosts. A strange smile appeared on his face. Sword Demon, are you still not going to reveal your true self? Chapter 565. True Body. Although Yi Xian spoke softly, everyone present was a powerful expert. They were all stunned when they heard Yi Xian's words. Then they looked at Sword Demon abruptly. In the Chaos Dojo, 8 terrifying ghost faces appeared around Sword Demon. A ferocious roar could be heard coming from Sword Demon's body. Sword Demon. His body did not move and his eyes were lowered. No one could see his expression clearly. After a full 10 breaths, something that shocked all the powerful experts happened. The heavenly ghost howled miserably. A terrifying witchcraft light suddenly erupted around Sword Demon. The 8 heavenly ghosts frantically tried to escape from Sword Demon's body. However, under the terrifying witchcraft light, they crumbled inch by inch until they turned into 8 wisps of ghostly smoke and disappeared without a trace. Such a scene made all the powerful experts feel like they were in a dream. They looked at the scene in horror. Everyone's eyes were filled with disbelief. No one could understand how such a bizarre thing could happen. The Sorcerer Tribe. He's a member of the Sorcerer Tribe? Suddenly Rock Demon exclaimed. He looked at Yi Xian abruptly. He finally understood why Yi Xian dared to conclude that the 8 heavenly ghosts were useless against Sword Demon. However, there was one thing that Rock Demon did not understand. Why was it that none of them could see through Sword Demon's true body? But Yi Xian could tell that Sword Demon was a member of the Sorcerer Tribe. At this moment, not only did Rock Demon discover Sword Demon's true body, but all the powerful experts also understood everything. After all, when Sword Demon revealed his Sorcerer Tribe aura, It revealed his identity as a member of the sorcerer tribe. As everyone knew, in the heaven, earth, and mortal realms, immortals, demons, and devils mainly cultivated the primordial spirit. Only the sorcerer tribe cultivated the physical body. There was no such thing as a primordial spirit. The 8 heavenly ghosts were indeed a ghost Tao, great divine ability. They could destroy a person's primordial spirit and cause a person to suffer a life and death calamity. It was indeed a top technique. It was a pity that such a great divine ability of the ghost Tao was useless against the shaman race, because the shaman race did not have a primordial spirit. At this moment, everyone came to a sudden realization. Only the South Pole immortal's face was flushed red. He clenched his fists tightly and gritted his teeth. It was obvious that he was the one who mocked Yi Xian earlier, and now it seemed that he was the one who was a joke. This also made him feel angry from embarrassment. "You're from the witch tribe?" Inside the primal chaos Tao field, Shen Tu's complexion changed drastically as the gloomy light around his body violently fluctuated, his expression becoming extremely dignified. When heaven and earth were first created, yin and yang were divided. Everything in this world had a natural counter to each other. Although the ghost immortal lineage had strange divine abilities, they also had 2 natural counters. Their greatest nemesis was the Western Spirit Mountains Buddhist lineage. Their vast Buddhist Dharma was extremely effective in restraining the ghost immortal lineage. They had an innate suppressive effect. The second biggest nemesis was the shaman tribe. Because the shaman tribe did not have primordial spirits, the power of their bloodline was like an erupting volcano. Their yang qi was extremely strong and could completely suppress the ghost immortal tribe at the same level. How could Shen Tu not be shocked when Sword Demon revealed his true identity? Although Shen Tu was one of the 5 great ghost emperors of the underworld, and was not that afraid of the shaman tribe, Sword Demon was also a peak grand heavenly realm existence. If he really fought with him, one of them would definitely die. Rumble! The starry sky exploded as the shaman art reached the heavens. As an ancient shaman, Sword Demon had the power to fight against the heavens and earth. When he revealed his true identity, he no longer hid anything. Kill! A punch blasted out, and the starry sky exploded. This was Sword Demon's stance of an ancient shaman to fight against the heavens and earth. He did not give Shen Tu any time to react, and directly charged at him violently. Sorcerer light filled the sky, and the fallen demon flew across the sky. Unlike the other ancient great sorcerers, the Sword Demon had not only cultivated the sorcerer tribe's art, but he had also studied the sword cultivator's art. When he combined the 2 great arts, he completely displayed his terrifying combat power. Stop! Shen Tu's expression changed. Ghost mist rose from his body as his figure frantically retreated. He did not want to fight to the death with Sword Demon. Unfortunately, Shen Tu forgot a very important thing. The shaman tribe was naturally warlike. As long as they entered a battle, they would fall into a hot-blooded state. How could they just stop? Die! With a towering roar, Sword Demon revealed his true nature. He no longer had any coldness. His whole body was like an erupting volcano. His yang qi filled the sky as his fist broke through the starry sky, and the meteor demon sword cut down the stars. Extremely terrifying great arts blasted towards Shen Tuesday. Bang bang bang. The heavens and earth turned upside down, and the starry sky exploded. Sword Demon was too terrifying. He directly suppressed Shen Tu, and forced him to retreat again and again. He could not fight head-on at all. It was not that Shen Tu's cultivation was inferior to Sword Demon. It was just that the shaman tribe's bloodline was too yang qi, and naturally had a great restraining effect on him. This also caused Shen Tu's face to turn gloomy, as he resisted Sword Demon's various great arts. Sword Demon, don't think that this emperor is afraid of you. This emperor just doesn't want to fight to the death with you. Why don't you stop? Shen Tu roared again and again. He violently shot out great arts of the ghost Tao, hoping that Sword Demon would temporarily stop. Bang! The starry sky exploded and shook in all directions. The 2 fiercely attacked each other, and both retreated. However, the yin light around Shen Tu's body dimmed. Obviously, he was suppressed to the extreme in the face of Sword Demon, an ancient shaman. Either admit defeat or die. Sword Demon stood in the starry sky as the meteor demon sword whistled and circled around him. Terrifying shaman light filled the sky as the aura of heaven conquering earth spread in all directions. Ancient shamans were fearless in all directions. At this moment, this was vividly displayed by Sword Demon. Shintu narrowed his eyes and his face was gloomy. He looked at Sword Demon with a murderous look. As one of the 5 great ghost emperors of the underworld, Shintu had his pride. Although he didn't want to fight Sword Demon to the death, if he directly surrendered, he would become the laughing stock of the 3 realms. Sword Demon, it's not that this emperor is afraid of you. It's just that the shaman clan and the underworld have always been at peace. If you and I really fight to the death, it will only cause hatred between the 2 sides. Shintu said gloomily, hoping that Sword Demon would understand the seriousness of the matter. Shintu knew that the shaman clan was extremely protective of their own. If he really killed Sword Demon, it would definitely cause trouble for him. The strongest of the shaman clan were the 12 ancient shamans. Each ancient shaman was a sage to be, but this wasn't the key point. The key point was that the 12 ancient shamans were formed from the blood essence of the great god Pangu. When the 12 ancient shamans laid down the 12 heavenly fiends formation, they could condense the true body of Pangu. Even a saint would be extremely afraid of them. Under the 12 ancient shamans, there were many ancient shamans and tens of millions of shamans. Although the number of shamans was not large, each of them had extremely terrifying combat strength. Throughout the 3 realms, no one dared to offend the shaman clan. Unless the ancient celestial court reappeared, and the 2 celestial emperors, the Eastern Emperor Tai Yi and Di Jun, appeared and commanded hundreds of millions of demon clans to reform the 3 realms. Only then could they fight the shaman clan. From this, one could see the horror of the shaman clan. Sword Demon, as long as you withdraw from this battle, this emperor will owe you a favor. Shintu said solemnly, giving Sword Demon a way out. Chapter 566. What a joke! You want me to quit? Do you think you're qualified? Sword Demon sneered as the fallen demon sword whistled through the starry sky. The terrifying body of the sorcerer bloomed with black light, as if he would attack Shintu again in the next moment. You're courting death. As the saying goes, even a clay figurine has a temper, let alone Shintu, the ghost emperor of the underworld. Shintu had already lowered himself, but Sword Demon was still pushing his luck. If he continued to persuade him, it would appear that he was afraid of Sword Demon. If this spread out, he would definitely be laughed at by all the great powers. Kill! The fallen demon sword slashed down, shattering the endless starry sky. Sword Demon swung his fists, and the terrifying body of the sorcerer glowed as he charged towards Shintu with the power to destroy the world. Sword Demon, you're forcing this emperor's hand. Shintu roared coldly. When he formed a seal with both hands, the world suddenly stagnated, and the bright starry sky suddenly dimmed, as if the entire space and time were distorted at this moment. Book of Life and Death. Shintu roared to the sky, and when he slapped out with his palm, the starry sky exploded. A mysterious light condensed in the starry sky, and an aura that could bury all things was born. Wang, a turbid halo distorting space and time, burying the world, was floating in front of Shintu's day. When the turbid halo dissipated, a scripture appeared. Hua hua hua. The scripture, ancient and dim, was slowly flipping through the starry sky. The light of the 6 paths of reincarnation bloomed on the scripture, and the chaotic Tao field thousands of miles around fell into silence. Book of Life and Death. Outside the battlefield, Taoist Huang Quan exclaimed, his body trembling unconsciously. He never thought that the Book of Life and Death, the supreme treasure of the underworld, would be in Shintu's possession. Not only was Taoist Huang Quan shocked, but Yi Xian's expression also changed, and a dignified look flashed across his eyes. In the past, when he was in the human world, there was a saying of the underworld, and he had seen the Book of Life and Death in the human world. However, the human world was just a place of exile, and the laws of heaven and earth there were incomplete. Even the Book of Life and Death in the underworld didn't have much power. But the Book of Life and Death in Shintu's hands was different. It was a true supreme treasure of the 3 realms, one that controlled the death of all living beings, and contained unimaginable power. The 6 paths of reincarnation, the cycle of life and death. This was the terrifying part of the Book of Life and Death. Even the sorcerer tribe could not escape from the cycle of life and death. The sword demon was in danger. Rumble. The Book of Life and Death was glowing. It was not a light, but the light of 6 paths of reincarnation. As the Book of Life and Death was born from the heavens and earth, it was filled with the law of 6 paths of reincarnation. Even the sorcerer tribesmen would suffer a great calamity. Suppress! Shintu roared. Since he had already reached this point, he had no choice but to kill Sword Demon on the spot. Clang! Under the suppression of the law of 6 paths of reincarnation, the fallen demon sword fell to the center of the Chaos Dojo. The Book of Life and Death that was nurtured by heaven and earth quietly appeared above the sword demon's head. The law of 6 paths of reincarnation that fell from the sky suppressed the sword demon on the spot. The 6 paths of reincarnation buried all living things. Even though Sword Demon was an ancient sorcerer and had an extremely strong physical body, when the 6 paths of reincarnation fell, his terrifying physical body cracked like a spider web. It wouldn't be long before he died tragically on the spot. One must know that the sorcerer tribe members were truly dead when their physical bodies were destroyed. This was because they didn't have a primordial spirit, and their physical bodies were the foundation of their lives. Go to hell, Sword Demon! Shintu had already gone crazy. He no longer had any scruples because he had to marry the Empyrean fairy, even if he had to kill Sword Demon and offend the sorcerer tribe. His physical body cracked inch by inch and blood spurted out. Sword Demon was suffering a great calamity that he had never experienced before. He wanted to blast away the Book of Life and Death that was falling on top of his head, but the 6 paths of reincarnation was too terrifying, and he couldn't even use a trace of his strength. Bang! Suddenly, a celestial light streaked across the starry sky and quietly appeared beside Sword Demon. A faint yellow light grew, and as the person pointed at the Book of Life and Death, the supreme treasure of the 3 realms was blasted away and saved Sword Demon's life. Yixian! When Shintu saw who it was, he let out a deafening roar. The light around his body became chaotic, and his eyes were filled with terrifying murderous intent as he looked at Yixian. Shintu never thought that Yixian would dare to intervene in the battle between the two of them when Sword Demon was about to die. This made him furious to the extreme. That why Yixian's appearance caused an uproar among the powerful experts. Everyone looked at Yixian with a strange expression. They didn't know why Yixian would save Sword Demon. Could the two of them be good friends? Huff, huff, huff. Sword Demon was panting heavily, and his body was covered in blood. However, he looked at Yixian in astonishment. His eyes were filled with great confusion. He didn't know why Yixian would save his life. Yixian, do you want to die? Shintu held the Life and Death book in his hand. The light around his body was majestic. He looked at Yixian with a gloomy expression, and an extremely gloomy murderous intent flashed across his eyes. Ha! Yixian smiled, but his smile was extremely strange. His eyes were filled with contempt as he looked at Shin Tuesday. You can't kill the person this emperor wants to save, Yixian said calmly with his hands behind his back. It was as if he was talking about something very casual. You're courting death, Shintu roared. He was furious. The Life and Death book rippled out and directly suppressed Yixian. 6 paths of reincarnation freeze. In the starry sky, the sound of the Tao rumbled. Yixian smiled strangely as the light of the 6 paths of reincarnation appeared behind him. With a point of his finger, he fixed the Life and Death sheet in the void. Impossible. Such a scene caused Shintu to scream in horror. His pupils shrank, and his body trembled to the extreme. Shintu was not the only one who was trembling. Even the great divines were stunned and speechless. They could not believe what they were seeing. The Life and Death book was the most precious treasure of the underworld. It was filled with the 6 paths of reincarnation. Except for the sage-to-be and the 6 great saints of the world, any living being that was suppressed by the Life and Death book would suffer a calamity. But what did all the great divines see? Yixian actually froze the Life and Death book in the starry sky, and his body was blooming with the 6 paths of reincarnation. This was simply unbelievable. The great divines did not dare to imagine it. Horror, doubt, and all kinds of complicated emotions intertwined, causing the starry sky to fall silent. Actually, no one knew that before Yi Xian had become an immortal, he'd already entered the Yama hell of the human world. He'd even controlled something like the Book of Life and Death, and had even refined the 6 paths of reincarnation laws of the human world for his own use. Although the 6 paths of reincarnation of the human world was incomplete, it was still the 6 paths of reincarnation. It came from the same source as the 6 paths of reincarnation of the 3 realms. This was also why Yi Xian could freeze the life and death book. It was because he had the 6 paths of reincarnation. Of course, this secret was only known to Yi Xian. The great divines naturally did not know about Yi Xian's experience. Chapter 567. The emotions of all the powerful experts fluctuated greatly, but the one who was the most inexplicably shocked was none other than Shin Tuesday. He stood in the primal chaos dojo in a daze, his body trembling unconsciously. 6 paths of reincarnation? Every word was spoken with difficulty. This was Shin Tu's current state. His face was pale, and his eyes were frozen. He looked at Yi Xian with great horror. Not only Shin Tu, but Taoist Huang Quan's aura was also chaotic. He also looked at Yi Xian with an extremely complicated expression. No one knew what he was thinking. In fact, the two of them couldn't be blamed for this. After all, they were both great figures of the underworld and cultivated the ghost immortal lineage. They were very clear about the 6 paths of reincarnation, an old legend. At the beginning of heaven and earth, all things were born. The 6 paths of reincarnation, the cycle of life and death. The 6 paths of reincarnation was born from heaven and earth. It was an extremely mysterious power. Anyone who could master the 6 paths of reincarnation would have mastered a heaven-defying divine ability. Reincarnation controlled life and death. Even a quasi-saint would face the danger of death when faced with the 6 paths of reincarnation. There was also an extremely ancient legend that anyone who could master the 6 paths of reincarnation would be able to step into the quasi-saint realm. Even among the quasi-saints, such a person would be an extremely terrifying existence. Of course, legends were only legends. No one could verify whether it was true or not. But whether it was Shen Tu or Taoist Huang Quan, both of them were supreme figures of the underworld. They were deeply aware of the terror of the 6 paths of reincarnation and wanted to master the power of the 6 paths of reincarnation. Unfortunately, the 6 paths of reincarnation in the 3 dimensions were too terrifying. Even if both of them were at the peak of the golden immortal realm, they didn't dare touch it in the slightest because a single misstep would cause Xingqia to be swallowed by the 6 paths of reincarnation, and his cultivation would be completely obliterated within the 6 paths of reincarnation. The two of them couldn't understand. Yi Xian was only at the 4th heavenly layer of grand heavenly immortals. Although his battle prowess was extremely amazing, how could he display the 6 paths of reincarnation? How could Shen Tu and Taoist Huang Quan not be terrified when such a thing happened to Yi Xian? At the center of the primal chaos dojo, as the life and death book floated in the air, Shen Tu frowned, his eyes filled with unease. The life and death book contained the terrifying power of the 6 paths of samsara, and he was only able to control it because he was familiar with the secret art. The most important thing was that he had come to the Niwa Palace to participate in this event because he wanted to marry the Empyrean fairy. In order to ensure that he would win in the end, he had personally gone to Fengdu Ghost City to meet the Emperor of Fengdu and borrowed the Book of Life and Death from him. However, the power of the 6 paths of reincarnation that Yi Xian had displayed had directly interfered with the Book of Life and Death, preventing him from using it. If such a treasure was taken away by Yi Xian, the Emperor of Fengdu would definitely not forgive him. It would also bring about a great shock to the underworld. Right now, Shen Tu was no longer in the mood to care about Sword Demon's life or death. He only wanted to take back the Book of Life and Death without any mishaps. If the Book of Life and Death fell into Yi Xian's hands, then he would be the biggest sinner in the underworld. Withdraw! Shen Tu was dripping with cold sweat as a ghostly fog filled the air. He quickly formed a series of seals with his hands, hoping to retrieve the life and death book. The thing that Shen Tu was worried about did not happen. He finally retrieved the book of life and death, which made him secretly heave a sigh of relief. His hanging heart was finally at ease. At this moment, Yi Xian frowned slightly as a hint of surprise flashed through his eyes. In fact, he really wanted to snatch the book of life and death from Shen Tu's hands. After all, he had witnessed the terror of the book of life and death with his own eyes. Even the sword demon, an ancient grand sorcerer, was instantly suppressed. Faced with such a treasure, Yi Xian naturally had the intention to seize it. However, when Yi Xian quietly circulated the 6 paths of law, it only caused the book of life and death to stagnate. It was impossible to cut off the connection between the book of life and death, and allowed Shen Tu to successfully retrieve the book of life and death. At this moment, Yi Xian understood one thing. Although he had refined the 6 paths of law of the mortal world, the 6 paths of law of the mortal world were incomplete. He did not have the method to control the book of life and death. Although he could interfere with the book of life and death, he could not seize it. However, Yi Xian was not disappointed. Since the book of life and death was so terrifying, it would be his sooner or later. Moreover, Yi Xian was getting more and more curious about the underworld. He secretly speculated how terrifying the complete 6 paths of law would be. Yi Xian was very ambitious. Since he could refine the 6 paths of law of the mortal world, why couldn't he refine the complete 6 paths of law for his own use? Something called ambition grew in Yi Xian's heart. Whether it was the book of life and death, or the 6 paths of reincarnation, they were all things that he coveted. Moreover, what Yi Xian saw today made him feel more and more that the underworld was mysterious. Just one of the 5 ghost emperors, and the underworld Taoist, were at the peak of the grand heavenly realm. Then, how powerful were the many terrifying figures in the underworld? Needless to say, the 10 kings of hell were all Daluo Jingxian. But what about those above the 10 kings of hell? As the saying goes, one can know the whole leopard from a single spot. The ghost emperor of the east, Shen Tu, was at the peak of the grand heavenly realm, but he was only one of the 5 ghost emperors. Then what was the cultivation of the emperor of Fengdu in the middle? Or was the emperor of Fengdu a real sage to be? Other than the 5 ghost emperors, what was the cultivation of Meng Po on the bridge of helplessness? Who was the master of the underworld gate? Who was in charge of the home viewing platform and the river of forgetfulness? Who was in charge of the 9 underworlds? How many ferocious demons and immortals had been suppressed in the 18 layers of hell since ancient times? And what was the relationship between the mysterious Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva and the underworld? The blood sea did not dry up. The river Styx did not die. The sage-to-be Nether River ancestor was also in the underworld, and the Azura clan dominated the underworld. It was so terrifying that it made one's hair stand on end. Although the underworld did not reveal itself, it was too terrifying. Among all the orthodoxies in the 3 realms, the underworld could be considered the strongest force. Perhaps only the ancient celestial court and the witch tribe could go against the underworld. In the 3 realms where saints did not appear, the sage-to-be was the strongest existence, and there was definitely not a single sage-to-be in the underworld. However, Yi Xian was not very clear about the power structure of the underworld, and it was also an extremely difficult bone for him to chew. The 3 realms was a place where all living things were respected. It sounded simple, but it was not that easy. Yi Xian had just ascended to the throne of the Celestial Emperor, and he wanted to truly rule the 3 realms as the Celestial Emperor. This was only the beginning, because the road ahead was too rugged and difficult. This series of thoughts flashed through Yi Xian's mind, until Sword Demon's voice rang in his ears, bringing Yi Xian back to reality. Yi Tiandi, I will always remember your kindness for saving my life. If you need my help in the future, even if there is a sage-to-be blocking the way, I will definitely lend you a helping hand. Sword Demon was a very straightforward person. He did not say any high-sounding words of gratitude. He bowed to Yi Xian and directly left the Chaos Dojo, but he still remembered Yi Xian's kindness for saving his life. Chapter 568. Suddenly, Shen Tu coldly snorted. but he didn't say anything. After all, he had already won, and was extremely wary of Yi Xian's 6 paths of reincarnation. He still hadn't figured out Yi Xian's true strength, so he didn't want to clash with Yi Xian at this moment. Although Shen Tu didn't want to fight with Yi Xian right now, it didn't mean that he would let Yi Xian go. Although he wouldn't attack, it shouldn't be forgotten that casually interfering in other people's battles was a great taboo of Nuwa Palace. Dare I ask your highness Nuwa? Yi Xian casually interfered in the battle between me and Sword Demon, completely ignoring the rules set by the saint. I ask your highness to give this disciple justice. Shen Tu directly knelt on the ground and kowtowed to Saint Nuwa in the depths of the Sea of Stars. This caused the powerful experts to hold their breath as they looked at Shen Tu with surprise. What a good Shen Tu! He's trying to kill Yi Xian. Rock Demon said in a gloomy voice as a heavy expression flashed across his eyes. Humph. The immortal elder of the South Pole coldly snorted and said, You can't blame Shen Tu for this. It was Yi Xian who ignored the rules of the Grand Assembly and didn't put the saint in his eyes at all. He should be severely punished. All kinds of noises and discussions could be heard as the powerful experts all looked towards the depths of the Sea of Stars, wondering how Saint Nuwa would deal with Yi Xian. At this moment, Shen Tu remained kneeling, as if waiting for Saint Nuwa to give him justice. However, when he lowered his eyes, a cruel and ruthless sneer appeared on his face, as if he could already see the scene of Yi Xian being punished by Nuwa. The great Tao is just the strong will always be strong. Since Yi Xian was able to save people, this is also his ability. If you, Ghost Emperor, refuse to accept this saint will allow the two of you to fight. Suddenly, a rumbling sound came from the depths of the Sea of Stars. Saint Nuwa's voice was emotionless, but when Shen Tu heard it, he broke out in a cold sweat and looked towards Yi Xian with extreme fear. She was blatantly biased, without any concealment at all. If the power of the 6 paths of reincarnation displayed by Yi Xian had already shocked Shen Tu, then Nuwa's favoritism towards Yi Xian, Nuwa's bias towards Nuwa's bias. It was clearly Yi Xian who did not abide by the rules and ignored Saint Nuwa. He, Shen Tu, had reason on his side, yet this was the result. If one were to say that Nuwa was not biased towards Yi Xian, then this was simply the biggest joke in the world. Not only was Shen Tu's heart trembling, but all the powerful cultivators were silent, looking at Yi Xian with extreme fear. It was all because of Saint Nuwa's unfair way of doing things that made them think that Yi Xian was extremely important to Nuwa. Everyone below the saint was an ant, and the so-called fairness was a joke in the eyes of the saints. To put it bluntly, the will of the saints was the rule, and they simply ignored the opinions of others. To use the simplest analogy, if 2 ants fought and asked a divine dragon of the 9th heaven to uphold justice, how could a mere ant be placed in the eyes of a divine dragon? No one could refute the saint's unfairness. Shen Tu's face was gloomy, and he quickly got up from the ground. He glared hatefully at Yi Xian, then directly left the primal chaos Tao field. Obviously, the saint was biased towards Yi Xian. If he were to argue based on reason, he would be no different from courting death. As for the battle with Yi Xian, Shen Tu was not stupid enough to do that, because he had just fought the Sword Demon, and his cultivation had been greatly depleted. If he were to fight with Yi Xian now, it would be extremely disadvantageous for him. So how could Shen Tu do such a stupid thing? At this moment, Yi Xian took a deep look at Saint Nuwa, who was in the depths of the Star Sea, and a trace of surprise flashed through his eyes. He was already prepared to face the saint's censure, but he did not expect that Nuwa would be so biased towards him. The saint's will was uncertain, and Yi Xian could not figure out the reason, but he did not think about it anymore, because his current cultivation level was still too far away from the saint realm. Yi Xian stepped out and left the primal chaos Tao field. At this moment, the ancient and melodious bell rang, indicating that the 4th round had officially begun. The South Pole Immortal Hermit flew up on a cloud and crossed paths with Yi Xian's returning figure. He let out a cold snort, and his eyes were full of coldness. Although Nuwa was biased towards him, and Yi Xian had displayed boundless combat strength, the South Pole Immortal Hermit was not afraid of Yi Xian. After all, He was Yuanshi Tianzuan's last disciple, and one of the saint's disciples. Naturally, he would not be afraid of Yi Xian like the others. At the same time, Myriad Law Sovereign was shrouded in an evil light, so no one could see his appearance. He slowly walked into the primal chaos Dao field. However, the battle between the South Pole Immortal Hermit and Myriad Law Sovereign did not attract the attention of all the great powers, because Myriad Law Sovereign's aura was only at the 8th level of Grand Heavenly Realm. On the other hand, the South Pole Immortal Hermit was at the 9th level of Grand Heavenly Realm, on top of being Yuanshi Tianzuan's disciple. There was no suspense in this battle. With the ringing of the bell, the 4th round officially began. However, something interesting happened. All the great powers were too lazy to look at this battle. They all walked towards Yi Xian while praising him. Yi Tiandi's cultivation is unparalleled, and he is the master of the 3 realms. This little immortal, Taoist Baiyun, congratulates Yi Tiandi on being the champion and marrying the Empyrean fairy. Little demon Mo Yin greets Yi Tiandi. This little Taoist Song Song greets Yi Tiandi. All the great powers arrived with flattering expressions on their faces. Firstly, Yi Xian's cultivation was truly terrifying. Secondly, Saint Nuwa was biased towards Yi Xian. This made them think that Yi Xian would be the winner of this event. The strong were as heavy as a mountain, and the weak were crawling like ants. The strong were all revered by others, and even the various great divine abilities were no exception. Being able to befriend Yi Xian was beneficial to them without any harm. Big brother, it seems like the Empyrean fairy is already in your bag this time. Peng Mo chuckled. Hearing Rock Demon's words, Yi Xian didn't make a sound. He only had a slight smile on his face, as he continuously greeted the various great experts. He had a courteous attitude. Clearly, the great powers present were an extremely terrifying force. As the Celestial Emperor, Yi Xian naturally had to rope them in. If he could get some great powers to join the Celestial Court, it would undoubtedly increase the Celestial Court's strength. Bang! Suddenly, just as Yi Xian and the various experts were laughing and chatting, an explosion sounded out from the primal chaos Dao field. A figure covered in blood fiercely smashed into the ground outside the primal chaos Dao field. The immortal of the South Pole spat out a mouthful of blood. His moon-white Taoist robe was stained with blood while his body cracked like a spiderweb. His face was ghastly pale, and the immortal light around him had collapsed without a trace. Silence, silence, a deathly silence. When this scene appeared before the eyes of the great masters, everyone felt as if they had fallen into a dream. They simply couldn't believe what they were seeing. Chapter 569. Let alone the powerful experts, even Yi Xian and the others were stunned. After 3 whole breaths of time, Yi Xian suddenly looked towards the Primal Chaos Dojo. He saw a dark figure walk out of the Primal Chaos Dojo, and then stand alone in the starry sky without moving or speaking. Myriad Law True Lord? Yi Xian murmured to himself, but his gaze towards the Myriad Law True Lord was extremely solemn. He also felt an extremely terrifying pressure invade his mind. He's not the Myriad Law True Lord. Suddenly, an extremely weak voice rang out. The immortal elder of the South Pole coughed up blood, as he pointed at the Myriad Law True Lord with trembling fingers. Unprecedented fear appeared in his eyes. What just happened? Why were you defeated? Shen Tu growled at the immortal elder of the South Pole. Clearly, the Myriad Law True Lord did not reveal himself, but how long had it been? He had actually injured the immortal elder of the South Pole to such a state. Shen Tu would never believe that the other party was a nobody. He's a quasi-saint. Peng Mo growled with a trembling voice, staring at the Myriad Law True Lord. A smear of extreme fear flashed through his eyes, as if he had discovered the other party's true identity. A quasi-saint. It immediately caused a huge commotion. When Peng Mo's words landed, all the powerful experts cried out in shock. They all focused their gazes on the Myriad Law True Lord. An emotion called fear permeated everyone. In the 3 realms where saints did not appear, quasi-saints were supreme existences. The so-called Daluo Jingxian was not even worth mentioning in the eyes of a quasi-saint. Peng Mo, do you recognize his true identity? Yi Xian asked sternly. Since Peng Mo could identify the other party as a quasi-saint, he clearly understood the other party extremely well. Perhaps he knew the other party's true origins. The myriad poison ancestor. Peng Mo's face was ghastly pale. He identified the other party as cold sweat dripped from his forehead. Clearly, his mind was in turmoil. The myriad poison ancestor? Shintu murmured to himself. Suddenly, he looked towards the rock demon and cried out, "Is the legend true? The quasi-saint who hunted you down in the past was the myriad poison ancestor?" With Shintu's words, Peng Demon Zhengzhong nodded, but his body was trembling and his eyes were drifting about. The scene of him being hunted down by the myriad poison ancestor in the past appeared in his mind. Bastard! Suddenly, the dim light dissipated, revealing a pale and handsome face. Although he looked like a young Confucian scholar, when he opened and closed his eyes, there was a sense of vicissitudes, as if he was an old man who had lived for countless years. Myriad poison ancestor. When the myriad poison ancestor revealed his true appearance, Shintu cried out in alarm, which made the various great cultivators even more terrified. The myriad poison ancestor, a quasi-saint. Back in the untainted world, he was merely at the peak of the grand heavenly realm. It was unknown why he had quietly entered the Sage-to-be realm after the war of the investiture of the gods. Although he was a rising star among the Sage-to-be, and could not be compared to those Sage-to-be who had lived for countless years, he was still an extremely terrifying figure. After all, the weakest among those who could become quasi-saints were existences that even Daluo Jingxian could not imagine. Now that the myriad poison ancestor had appeared in the gathering of Niwa Palace, the outcome of this gathering was already without any suspense. In 3 days, the battle between the top 4 will begin. Just as the various experts were deathly silent, the rumbling of the Tao rang out from all directions in the starry sky. The primal chaos Tao field was dissipating, and space and time in this area changed. The myriad poison ancestor smiled at Yi Xian, then took a step forward and disappeared into the starry sky. A simple glance from the myriad poison ancestor made Yi Xian frown, as he could sense a hint of mockery in his gaze, like a cat looking at a mouse. A quasi-saint? Yi Xian's eyes were vicious, and his voice was cold and deep. He suddenly turned around and vanished. No one knew what Yi Xian was thinking. "Big brother, wait for me." The rock demon was pale as he caught up to Yi Xian in a hurry. The two of them returned to their respective fields of light. The great abilities of the various powers all dispersed, except everyone was bitter. Clearly, the meeting had already come to a conclusion. The myriad poison ancestor would definitely return victorious, as no one was the myriad poison ancestor's opponent. The sky was filled with stars, and the hall had no roof. Yi Xian sat in the air, as the immortal light of the great immortal realm shone slightly around him. The rock demon paced back and forth in the hall. His brows were firmly furrowed together, as if he had encountered a monumental problem. "Rock demon, don't you have anything you want to say to this emperor?" Suddenly, Yi Xian opened his eyes slowly. He looked at the rock demon with a vicious gaze, which made the rock demon's aura freeze. He looked at Yi Xian with an ugly expression. It was silent and oppressive. The two of them stared at each other for several dozen seconds, until the rock demon's sunken eyes dispersed. He also let out a long sigh. "Brother Yi, you must be very confused as to why I want to travel with you, right?" the rock demon said sternly. Yi Xian said nothing, as he believed the rock demon would tell him the reason himself. Sure enough, after a moment of silence, the rock demon slowly explained his true intentions for participating in this gathering. The rock demon's original form was the golden-winged Great Peng, and he was also in existence revered as an ancestor in the 3 realms. The myriad poison ancestor was also a peak grand immortal before he had become a quasi-saint, except his original form was the myriad poison scorpion king. The two of them could be described as natural enemies. In a battle for the spiritual herbs of the world, the two of them could be said to have formed a blood feud. Many great battles had erupted between them, but they all ended with the myriad poison ancestor fleeing in defeat. After all, the golden-winged Great Peng naturally countered the myriad poison scorpion king. Even though their cultivations were similar, the myriad poison ancestor was not the rock demon's opponent. 100,000 years ago, for some reason, the myriad poison ancestor just happened to become a quasi-saint, which also began the rock demon's 100,000-year path of escape. Just like how once you become a quasi-saint, Grand Immortal would be no different from pigs or dogs. In the past, the myriad poison ancestor had been hunted down by the rock demon for millions of kilometers. So now that he had become a quasi-saint, how could he let the rock demon go? Under the endless pursuit, the rock demon lived in fear every single day. He was deeply afraid that the myriad poison ancestor would find his tracks and end up dead. Only when Saint Nua passed down a decree to start this gathering did the rock demon see a sliver of hope, as he knew that all the people who could participate in this gathering definitely possessed extraordinary backgrounds. Perhaps they could help him break free from the myriad poison ancestor's pursuit. Sure enough, when the rock demon entered the 33rd layer of heaven, he saw Yi Xian carrying the immortal ending sword on his back. This also made the rock demon lower himself and befriend Yi Xian, traveling with Jade White. The rock demon's thoughts were very simple. Yi Xian was the celestial emperor of the three worlds, and he had the support of the Tongtian. He also carried the immortal ending sword on his back, which was a saint's spiritual treasure. Even quasi-saints would have to fear it. Moreover, the rock demon had a vague guess that since the immortal ending sword was in Yi Xian's hands, perhaps the other three swords were in Yi Xian's hands as well. If Yi Xian came with the immortal slaying sword formation, even quasi-saints would have to avoid him. This was because the cultivation Yi Xian displayed was only at the fourth heavenly layer of Grand Immortal Realm. Only the immortal slaying sword formation could defeat the various great masters. Even if quasi-saints came in person, they would have to admit defeat. This was also why the rock demon wanted to befriend Yi Xian. He even planned on joining Yi Xian. His only request was for Yi Xian to help him fend off the myriad poison ancestor's endless pursuit. However, the rock demon had never thought that Yi Xian had not used the immortal ending sword at all, let alone the so-called immortal slaying sword formation. This also left the rock demon extremely confused. He had no idea whether the immortal slaying sword formation was in Yi Xian's hands or not. However, when the myriad poison ancestor heavily injured the immortal elder of the South Pole, the rock demon discovered the myriad poison ancestor's true body. Extreme fear rose up from the bottom of his heart. Right now, he was in Nua's palace, so the myriad poison ancestor would not attack him. However, once the banquet ended, the first person the myriad poison ancestor would kill would definitely be him. As a result, the rock demon's only hope lay with Yi Xian. As long as Yi Xian possessed the immortal slaying sword formation, the myriad poison ancestor could only temporarily avoid him, and he would be able to avoid a life-or-death crisis. As the rock demon explained tirelessly, Yi Xian finally understood the rock demon's objective. Brother Yi, there's no need for us to feign civility at a time like this. Tell me, are the immortal slaying swords in your hands? The rock demon asked in a hurry. His gaze towards Yi Xian was filled with hope. The immortal slaying swords? Yi Xian shook his head slowly. He said sternly, "A worthy younger brother, you're overthinking things. The immortal slaying swords are the greatest killing weapon beneath the heavenly Tao, as well as the greatest treasure of the Tongtian kingdom. How can they possibly be in my hands?" Hearing Yi Xian's words, the rock demon's face immediately paled. Even his eyes became extremely stern. "You must be joking, big brother. If you don't have the immortal slaying swords, you won't be able to cast down the immortal slaying sword formation. Even if your battle prowess is equivalent to a peak grand immortal, how are you supposed to be the myriad poison ancestor's opponent?" The rock demon asked with a trembling voice. Unfortunately, Yi Xian did not answer the rock demon's question. However, when he opened and closed his eyes, a cold light flashed through the bottom of his eyes. He murmured, "The myriad poison ancestor has just become a saint. He might not necessarily be the final victor." Chapter 570. 3 days later, the stars moved, and the world changed. The chaotic field of seats rose up once again. Various great masters gathered from all directions, all standing in the starry sky. The 4 strongest, please step forward and draw your lots. The chaotic field rumbled. This also meant that the battle for the top 4 was about to begin. Shen Tu, the Yellow Springs priest, Yi Xian, and the myriad poison ancestor were the 4 strongest. Whoever could marry the Empyrean fairy would stand out from the 4 of them. However, in the eyes of the various great masters, the final 2 rounds were already without any suspense, as the myriad poison ancestor was a quasi-saint. It was impossible for so-called peak grand immortal realm cultivators to be his opponent. Quasi-saints. These 2 simple words represented a completely different level of existence. They were not something peak grand immortal realm cultivators could stop. This was also an unchanging ironclad law. No one had ever been able to change it. At the beginning of the world and the birth of all living things, quasi-saints were supreme. It was not impossible for someone to defeat a quasi-saint, but it definitely would not manifest through cultivation. Sect leader Tongtian's immortal slaying sword formation, the 12 heavenly fiends formation of the shaman tribe, the primordial cosmic constellation formation of the Chan sect, and some legendary primordial ultimate treasures, could all kill Sage to be at the zenith heaven realm. However, without any exception, whether it be killing formations or natural supreme treasures, most of these items belong to saints. As a result, defeating a quasi-saint was extremely difficult. Of course, there were differences among quasi-saints as well. The myriad poison ancestor had only just become a quasi-saint. Whether it be his heritage or cultivation, he was the weakest existence among quasi-saints. However, quasi-saints were quasi-saints after all. They could not be compared to immortals. In the eyes of the various great masters, the final victor of this gathering could only be the myriad poison ancestor. The other 3 would only serve as a foil. There would be no exceptions. Of course, there were also great masters who secretly paid attention to Yi Xian. They all guessed that the sword on Yi Xian's back was the immortal ending sword, as everyone knew that the Tongtian had played an extremely important role in Yi Xian's ascension to the position of celestial emperor. Moreover, he had even bestowed the immortal ending sword to Yi Xian as Yi Xian's protector. If Yi Xian had the immortal exterminating sword array, the remaining 2 rounds of battle would be filled with suspense. In the primal chaos hall, the 4 of them began to draw lots. The myriad poison ancestor was completely unperturbed. He was the first to draw his lot. When he drew his lot, it was a 1, which meant his opponent was a 4. Yi Xian was silent. He drew his lot calmly. As he unfurled the lot in his hand, it turned out to be 3. This also happened to allow him to avoid a battle with the myriad poison ancestor. As the 2 of them drew their lots, the Yellow Spring Taoist and Shen Tu's faces became ugly. Clearly, one of them would be chosen for the battle against the myriad poison ancestor. When the 2 of them drew their lots, Shen Tu's face immediately paled, and his eyes were filled with extreme reluctance. When he slowly revealed his lot, it was the number 4. His opponent was the myriad poison ancestor. Clang! The sound of a bell echoed through the stars. Yi Xian and the Yellow Spring Taoist left the primal chaos hall. Clearly, the first battle would be between Shen Tu and the myriad demon ancestor, which attracted the attention of all the great abilities. Shen Tu was one of the 5 emperors of the underworld. He was definitely not weak, and he even possessed the Book of Life and Death right now. Although he was facing a quasi-saint, he was not completely powerless. The myriad poison ancestor's black clothes fluttered in the wind. He was extremely handsome, like a scholar from the school of Confucianism. If he were immortal, no one would believe that he was a quasi-saint, let alone a quasi-saint of the evil path. All eyes were fixed on the battle. Everyone froze. Not only were the great abilities watching the battle, but even Yi Xian and the Yellow Spring Taoist watched with rapt attention. Clearly, they wanted to see just how terrifying a quasi-saint's abilities were. In the center of the primal chaos hall, the myriad poison ancestor stood with one hand behind his back. He did not give off any aura at all. However, his gaze towards Shen Tu was completely indifferent, like he was looking at an ant. "You may leave," the myriad poison ancestor said softly. The myriad poison ancestor said softly, as if he was talking about something very casual. However, when Shen Tu heard it, the expression of the ghost emperor of the underworld changed. Myriad Poison Ancestor, you may be a quasi-saint, but I, Shen Tu, am also one of the 5 emperors of the underworld. If you can form a good relationship with me today, I will definitely not forget today's kindness when I become a quasi-saint in the future. My lineage of the underworld will definitely treat you as a close friend. Shen Tu lowered himself to an extremely low level, even bringing up the underworld in hopes that the Myriad Poison Ancestor would withdraw from the battle. With Shen Tu's words, all the great abilities secretly nodded. They looked at Shen Tu in amazement. Clearly, Shen Tu was very smart. He knew that even with the Book of Life and Death, he was not the Myriad Poison Ancestor's opponent. However, as the Ghost Emperor of the Underworld, he could use the influence of the Underworld to pressure the Myriad Poison Ancestor, giving him a lot of face. This also demonstrated Shen Tu's intelligence. Unfortunately, the Myriad Poison Ancestor was unfazed. He only looked at Shen Tu with a cold smile and said indifferently, "Are you trying to use the underworld to pressure me? I wouldn't dare. This emperor only wants to form a good relationship with fellow Myriad Poison." Shen Tu's face changed slightly, and he bowed in a hurry. After all, he was facing a quasi-saint. He was deeply afraid of angering him and suffering a calamity. It's very difficult to say whether a mere ghost emperor can become a quasi-saint. Do you think you have the right to form a good relationship with me, with your current cultivation? The Myriad Poison Ancestor sneered. He was extremely disdainful. The realm of quasi-saint was not just empty talk. Across the 3 worlds, who knew how many peak grand immortal immortals were shackled there, unable to become a quasi-saint at all. Although Shen Tu was one of the 5 emperors of the underworld, it was still extremely difficult for him to become a quasi-saint. Why would the Myriad Poison Ancestor take him seriously? And the Myriad Poison Ancestor was extremely confident that even if he killed Shen Tu, no quasi-saint would stand up for him, as the karma that resulted from the grievances between quasi-saints was far too terrifying. This was a foolish action that would only bring about harm and no benefits. In the center of the chaotic square, Shen Tu looked at the scornful smile on the Myriad Poison Ancestor's face, and his expression became uglier and uglier. His eyes even swiveled slightly. He had no idea whether he should retreat or fight the Myriad Poison Ancestor with the Book of Life and Death. Actually, Shen Tu's participation in this gathering this time seemed like he wanted to take the Empyrean Fairy as his wife. But the true reason was to break through to the 9th heavenly layer of Grand Immortal Immortals and reach the supreme realm of Quasi-Saint. The reason was very simple. The Empyrean Fairy was born from the beauty of the world, and she possessed the innate body of ways. If he could dual cultivate with the Empyrean Fairy, there was an extremely great chance that it would assist him in breaking through to the Grand Immortal realm, which was also Shen Tu's true objective. Not to mention, the Empyrean Fairy had the Saint Nuwa behind her, which would provide him with tremendous assistance. Unfortunately, Shen Tu had planned this out very well. He had even borrowed the Book of Life and Death from the Emperor of Feng, due just in case. However, he had never thought that a quasi-saint would actually take part in this gathering, which made his foolproof plan fall through. Chapter 571. As the saying went, if you did not die in silence, you would erupt in silence. Shen Tu was about to advance to the finals, only a step away from marrying the Empyrean Fairy. How could he be willing to give up now? Good. Shen Tu bellowed out. His expression was slightly vicious and deranged, and he even said good 3 times in a row. Then let this emperor see just what you're capable of, Myriad Poison Ancestor. Since he had already reached this point, there was nothing more Shen Tu could say. He directly pushed his essence, energy, and soul to the peak, and he wielded the Book of Life and Death. An extremely terrifying pulse erupted around Shen Tu's day. This was a battle with his back to the wall. If he did not advance, he would fall back. No matter what, how could Shen Tu be willing to give up without a fight? Suppress! Shen Tu formed a supreme ghost seal, and the ghostly mist around him rushed into the air. The supreme treasure of the underworld, the Book of Life and Death, buzzed as the light of the 6 paths of reincarnation appeared, crushing towards the myriad poison ancestor with boundless pressure. "You're just showing off before an expert," the myriad poison ancestor sneered. He did not seem to do anything, but the laws of the world around him surged. The boundless starry sky suddenly darkened, and strands of chaotic light appeared around him. "Heaven and earth transformation," the myriad poison ancestor bellowed out. When he extended a finger, the chaotic field twisted to the extreme. Strands of chaotic light descended from the starry sky, drawing an extremely terrifying star chart, directly enveloping the entire field. Clang! The book of life and death was sent flying, and the light of the 6 paths of reincarnation collapsed. Shintu shrieked out in fright as light surged around him, protecting himself in the center. He hoped he could block the myriad poison ancestor's terrifying technique. Bang! The light exploded and blood splattered across the sky. Shintu let out a blood-curdling scream as the light around him shattered inch by inch. His illusory ghost immortal body was constantly being destroyed. His entire body was like a falling meteor, as he was ruthlessly smashed out of the chaotic Tao field. Rumble! Shintu's damaged body smashed through one star after another. The myriad poison ancestor's strike condensed from the laws of the world directly sent Shintu flying. Its earth-shaking power was far too terrifying, as it was an attack from a quasi-saint. How could Shintu block it? Considering you're one of the 5 emperors of the underworld, I'll spare your life today. The myriad poison ancestor stood with his hands behind his back as his voice echoed through the starry sky. Puff! Blood spurted out from Shintu's mouth as he dragged his battered body back from the depths of the starry sky. However, there was no place on his body that was intact, and the book of life and death in his hand was no longer moving. This emperor admits defeat. Shintu gritted his teeth and clenched his fists. Even though he was absolutely unwilling to accept this, he knew he was not the myriad poison ancestor's opponent after witnessing the attacks of a quasi-saint. If he continued fighting, he would only end up dying. A battle without any suspense came to an end just like that, and the result was not surprising to the various great powers. The myriad poison ancestor left the stage, and the bell that echoed through thousands of kilometers rang out. It meant the second battle had officially begun. Yi Xian was dressed in black, and his black hair draped behind his head. When he took a step out, he silently appeared in the center of the primal chaos hall. He did not give off any aura at all. The Yellow Springs Taoist was hunched over, like an old man at sunset. He strolled into the primal chaos hall before smiling at Yi Xian. However, his gaze towards Yi Xian was mixed. "Please." Yi Xian did not waste any words, nor did he underestimate the Yellow Springs Taoist. This was because he could sense that apart from the myriad poison ancestor, the Yellow Springs Taoist could be described as the strongest person in the entire gathering. Even Shintu might not necessarily be the Yellow Springs Taoist's opponent. Up in the sky and down in the Yellow Springs, there was nowhere to be seen. The Yellow Springs Taoist cultivated in the depths of the Yellow Springs, and he practiced the unfathomable immortal scripture of the Yellow Springs. He was indeed a great opponent. "Yi Tiandi, please wait." Before Yi Xian could do anything, the Yellow Springs Taoist called out gently. He did not show any signs of wanting to fight Yi Xian, which made Yi Xian and the spectating great masters all watch in surprise. The Yellow Springs Taoist could completely sense Yi Xian's doubts, which also made him let out a long sigh. "A quasi-saint has appeared. Even if I end up winning in a battle of life and death against the Celestial Emperor, I'm not the opponent of a quasi-saint. If that's the case, why should I fight the Celestial Emperor to the death? I concede." Under the stunned gazes of the great masters, the Yellow Springs Taoist clasped his hands towards Yi Xian. His voice echoed through the primal chaos hall. At this moment, Yi Xian sighed inside. He had no idea whether he should rejoice or feel vexed. Ever since the myriad poison ancestor revealed his quasi-saint status, the other participants had already lost their will to fight. The Yellow Springs Taoist's automatic forfeit had instead benefited him. "Yi Tiandi's cultivation is unrivaled. I admire you greatly. If the Celestial Emperor descends upon the underworld one day, you can definitely pay a visit to the Yellow Springs Palace. I'll be ready to welcome you." I'm willing to discuss the path with the heavens and earth, the Yellow Springs Taoist said hoarsely. Taoist Huang Quan said in a hoarse voice as he directly left the primal chaos Tao field. This also symbolized Yi Xian's victory in this competition. What a brilliant move, Taoist Yellow Springs, the rock demon said sternly. His gaze towards the Yellow Springs Taoist was filled with admiration. Actually, the Yellow Springs Taoist had made the right choice. Even if Taoist Huang Quan defeated Yi Xian, he would suffer an extremely heavy injury. Moreover, he would have to face a quasi-sage like the myriad poison ancestor. In the end, he would still be defeated. If he died miserably at the hands of the myriad poison ancestor, it would be even more of a loss. However, the Yellow Springs Taoist forfeited. Not only had he preserved his cultivation and strength, but he had also sold Yi Xian a favor, allowing him to form a good relationship with Yi Xian. It could be described as an extremely correct choice. Rumble. Suddenly, sacred light spread out from the depths of the starry sea. Mother Nuwa, who had remained motionless all this time, began to walk out from the depths of the starry sea. The sacred light that seemed to be indestructible by all tribulations covered her, making it impossible to see what she looked like. Greetings, Empress Nuwa. With the arrival of a saint, all living beings bowed in worship. The great cultivators of various places all knelt in worship. Even the myriad poison ancestor, a quasi-saint, was no exception. The only person who did not kneel in worship towards Nuwa was Yi Xian, who stood in the center of the primal chaos hall. Big brother, hurry up and pay your respects to the saint. When the rock demon saw Yi Xian standing still, his face immediately paled. He even secretly communicated with him secretly, but he did not receive any reply from Yi Xian. Yi Xian's disrespect towards the saint obviously caught the attention of the great cultivators of various places. This also made them all look towards Yi Xian, and a smear of shock flashed through their eyes. Had Yi Xian lost his mind? Mad, he had to be mad. The Empress Nuwa had come in person, yet he did not kneel in worship. Was he tired of living? Yi Xian was looking for death. Everyone below the saint was an ant. If he made the Empress Nuwa displeased, she could kill him instantly. Chapter 572. All the powerful beings cursed Yi Xian for his ignorance and stupidity in their hearts. They all looked at Yi Xian, wondering if Saint Nuwa would blame him. Nuwa hovered in the air with holy light covering her body. She did not show any signs of anger. She just looked at Yi Xian calmly, and her gentle voice sounded at this moment. Yi Xian, why don't you kneel when you see me? The words of the saint were like the heavens and the earth. The boundless aura of the saint filled the 33 heavens, causing the various experts to tremble. As for Yi Xian, who was at the center of the saint's might, a trace of cold sweat appeared on his forehead. Terrifying, too terrifying, terrifying to the extreme. This was the feeling that Saint Nuwa gave to Yi Xian. It was also his first time facing a saint, but he felt that he was as insignificant as an ant in front of a saint. Is this the power of a saint? Yi Xian roared in his heart, because under the aura of the saint, he could not even move a finger. His mind was trembling to the extreme, and a feeling called fear grew in the bottom of his heart. The 6 desires are emotionless, and the heaven and earth are heartless. Yi Xian's eyes froze as the undying immortal scripture violently circulated. He let out a hysterical roar in his heart, and only then did he suppress his fear. His black pupils gradually turned gray, and a wisp of dark mist quietly spread out around him. Only then did his fluctuating mind calm down. Nuwa made a sound of doubt. The way she looked at Yi Xian changed slightly, but it returned to normal in the blink of an eye, as if there had never been any fluctuations in her emotions. Yi Xian, I'm asking you a question. Why aren't you answering? Nuwa spoke again, but her voice was slightly colder. However, it made all the powerful beings pale, because if a saint was angry, it would be an extremely terrifying thing. Yi Xian, why aren't you kneeling down and kowtowing to Master Nuwa? The Empyrean fairy urged anxiously. She looked at Yi Xian with a complicated look in her eyes. She did not know why Yi Xian was so daring to be so presumptuous, even in the presence of a saint. Unfortunately, Yi Xian did not move. He cupped his hands slightly towards Nuwa in the starry sky and said in a manner that was neither servile nor overbearing, Yi Xian greets Empress Nuwa. However, Yi Xian only believes in himself and does not bow to the heavens and earth. Although you are a saint, I am unable to kneel to you. Oh, Nuwa's expression changed. Her voice was slightly cold as she said, "What if I insist on making you kneel? My words are the law, and my actions are the law. A single thought, a single will, can cause the heavens and earth to fall into chaos." When Empress Nuwa spoke coldly, the space-time around them froze, and an extremely terrifying pressure attacked Yi Xian's body. Kikik. Yi Xian's straight spine was slowly bending, and the bones in his knees were cracking. His face was extremely red as he endured Nuwa's saint aura. It was as if he would kneel on the ground in the next moment. Haha. Suddenly, Yi Xian laughed wildly. When he opened and closed his eyes, a cold glint flashed through them. His voice echoed in the starry sky in all directions. "You are a saint. I, Yi Xian, am not worth mentioning in your eyes. I am merely an ant. If you want me to kneel, I, Yi Xian, will naturally not be able to resist. However, if I, Yi Xian, step into the saint realm one day, today's karma will be repaid in the future. How dare you?" Suddenly, the expressions of all the powerful experts changed, and they all loudly rebuked Yi Xian. This was because Yi Xian's words were too shocking. He was openly challenging the dignity of a saint. Even if he died 1,000,000 times, it would not be regrettable. Saints could not be humiliated, and those who humiliated them must be killed. Although Yi Xian's words were not meant to insult Nuwa, this was still a great offense. Empress Nuwa could completely kill him, and no one would be able to say anything. Silence. Suddenly, before the powerful experts could rebuke him again, Nuwa's calm voice came from the starry sky above the 9 heavens. The saint aura that had been exerting on Yi Xian slowly dissipated at this moment. "Yi Xian, you are very good." Nuwa's voice was very calm. It was so calm that there was not the slightest ripple. She also did not punish Yi Xian, as if she did not care about Yi Xian's great offense. This also caused the expressions of all the powerful experts to change slightly. They did not expect that Saint Nuwa would not blame Yi Xian. However, no one noticed that Empress Nuwa was frowning under the cover of the saint aura. A trace of seriousness flashed through her eyes. "Today's karma will be repaid in the future." These words came from Yi Xian's mouth. These words seemed simple, but to Nuwa, they were earth-shattering. The reason was very simple. From Nuwa's point of view, Yi Xian was very likely to be the 7th saint. If she really forced Yi Xian to kneel before her today, when Yi Xian became a saint in the future, he would definitely settle this great humiliation with her. The karma between saints was not just a matter of words. It had extremely terrifying consequences. Just look at the investiture of the gods' war. The 3 pure ones collapsed. Tong Tian held the immortal extermination sword formation and faced the 4 saints alone. He even set up the 10,000 immortals formation to destroy the 3 realms. Although Dao ancestor Hongjun appeared in the end and stopped this calamity, the karma between Tong Tian and the 4 saints had not been resolved even now. Endless time passed, and the immeasurable calamity appeared again. Tong Tian used Yi Xian to stir up trouble again. It was likely that he would settle the karma of the past with the 4 saints. This was the terror of the karma between saints. Furthermore, Nuwa had a premonition that even saints would be in danger of dying in this immeasurable calamity. This feeling was extremely strong, and it made Nuwa even more convinced. When Yi Xian said that today's karma will be repaid in the future, how could Nuwa's mind not be disturbed? Saints' karma could not be tainted. This was Nuwa's way of life. After experiencing so many calamities, she had never formed any bad karma with the other 5 saints. Although she only guessed that Yi Xian might be the 7th saint, she did not want to take this risk. On the other hand, Yi Xian did not think so much because he never thought of himself as the 7th saint. He also never thought of himself as the main character of the world, nor did he think of himself as someone with great fortune. In Yi Xian's mind, he started as a weak youth and walked step by step to become the heavenly emperor today. His path was accompanied by a storm of blood and rain. He had experienced countless hardships to reach his current cultivation. Yi Xian also believed that even though he was forced to kneel by Nuwa today, He would prove his Tao and become a saint in the future. He would definitely not forget today's humiliation and would return it 1,000 times over. He would definitely look for Nuwa to settle the score. This was Yi Xian's simplest thought. It was not just his thoughts. Yi Xian had always been pushing himself forward. He had never been careless in his cultivation. He also believed that one day, he would transcend the 3 realms and become an existence above the heavenly Tao. Whether it was his ambition or his unwillingness to submit to others, Yi Xian's thoughts had never changed. Chapter 573. The karma of saints could not be tainted. Nuwa was a saint, but she had her own fears. If Yi Xian really was the 7th saint of heaven's mandate, then he would definitely be an existence that stood on equal footing with her in the future. Perhaps some people would say that Yi Xian was only a measly Daoyuo Jingxian right now. Saints could kill him with a single thought. So why would there be anything to fear? Actually, saints were lofty existences, but they still had to follow the operation of the heavenly way. Even if Nuwa wanted to kill Yi Xian, if Yi Xian really was the saint of heaven's mandate, he would definitely be able to escape for some reason. This was the helplessness of saints under the heavenly way. It was also for this reason that Yi Xian had killed so many disciples of the cult of enlightenment. Yuanshi Tianzuan said nothing, as the 6 saints all suspected Yi Xian to be the 7th saint of heaven's mandate, so they obviously could not punish Yi Xian when he was still weak. They were also afraid of the consequences when he became a saint. After all, the Tongtian was an excellent example. Clang, clang, clang. The tremendous sound of bells rang out in the boundless starry sky. Nuwa's voice rang out at this moment, as she enveloped herself in the starry sky. This is the final battle. Life and death will be decided. The victor will be able to take the arcane maiden as his wife. Rumble. With Nuwa's words, all the great abilities present stood up and gazed at the chaotic sight. They knew that the final battle was about to begin. However, everyone looked at Yi Xian with mixed feelings. None of the people present were idiots. They were all the best of the best among Grand Immortal Realm cultivators, and there were even existences at the peak of Grand Immortal Realm. Nuwa's attitude towards Yi Xian made them all suspicious. Thump, thump, thump. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps rang out in the surroundings. The myriad poison ancestor strolled through space, making his way towards the primal chaos hall. With each step he took, the space around him would twist. His might as a quasi-saint was on full display. The myriad poison ancestor strolled in calmly. This was how the myriad poison ancestor behaved. Even when he arrived in front of Yi Xian, his gaze towards Yi Xian became indifferent. Little friend, I don't want to make things difficult for you on account of your cultivation. If you become a quasi-saint in the future, you can fight with me. You can leave now. The myriad poison ancestor stood with one hand behind his back, giving off the dignified bearing of a quasi-saint. He was currently advising Yi Xian softly, which was already giving Yi Xian enough face. Logically speaking, there was no need for the myriad poison ancestor to lower himself and say so much to Yi Xian. As a quasi-saint, he could suppress Yi Xian with just a finger in the eyes of the various great abilities. There was no suspense at all. However, what the various great abilities did not know was that the myriad poison ancestor had taken note of Nuwa's attitude towards Yi Xian, and Yi Xian even had the Tongtian behind him. This also proved that Yi Xian would definitely become a quasi-saint in the future, which was why he had lowered himself to Yi Xian. What if I don't? Suddenly, Yi Xian smiled, which made the myriad poison ancestor frown. His gaze towards Yi Xian sunk. Little friend, as the saying goes, a wise man submits to circumstances. You're not my opponent with your measly grand immortal cultivation. If you really want to be stubborn, then don't blame me for taking action and suppressing you. The myriad poison ancestor was a quasi-saint. If it were not for the fact that Yi Xian had a Tongtian behind him, and if it were not for the fact that Nuwa's attitude towards Yi Xian was perplexing, he would have attacked Yi Xian a long time ago. Why would he waste so much time talking? Come, let this emperor see just how capable you are as a quasi-saint. Yi Xian was not a person who liked bickering. Since he had already come this far, there was no way out for him. The undying immortal scripture had already begun to circulate rapidly, and his origin immortal body and indestructible soul had been condensed to the limit. Since you're looking for death, then don't blame me. The myriad poison ancestor's face turned cold. He was no longer in the mood to waste time on Yi Xian. He extended a finger towards Yi Xian, and something extremely terrifying happened. Boom, boom, boom. The starry sky exploded, and the world shifted. Chaotic light flourished in the chaotic field of Tao, and extremely terrifying laws of the world went berserk. A colossal hand that blotted out the sky appeared in the boundless starry sky, falling towards Yi Xian with overwhelming power. 8 gates of life and death, immortal transformation. The strike of a quasi-saint was a calamity of life and death. Yi Xian did not test it at all, as he knew he could not receive the strike at all. As a result, he directly used the immortal defying formation. Bang, bang, bang. In the boundless starry sky, 8 doors appeared in the boundless starry sky, and the luminous star rumbled as it rotated. The terrifying aura of immortal transformation covered the sky and earth, and the immortal defying diagram quietly appeared above Yi Xian's head, covering his entire body. Tribulation transcender transformation. Yi Xian roared at the sky, and a blood-red moon fell down. His 3,000 strands of black hair moved without any wind, becoming extremely blood-red from the roots to the tips of his hair. A deep, gloomy light surged around him slightly. Immortal defying formation, tribulation transcender transformation. This was one of Yi Xian's 2 greatest trump cards, and it had allowed Yi Xian to survive countless tribulations. Now that he was facing a quasi-saint, he instantly used it. Great demonic fist. His roar shattered the stars, shattering the past and present. With the immortal defying formation protecting him, and the tribulation transcender transformation, Yi Xian's strength soared. And with the origin immortal body glowing, and the indestructible origin spirit buzzing in his sea of consciousness, Yi Xian's strength reached the apex when he used all of these trump cards. A fist aura shattered the galaxy, and another fist aura shattered the stars. That resplendent fist aura was like the light of dawn that could split heaven and earth. It was so dazzling that people couldn't open their eyes. It was so domineering that it met the giant palm head-on. Bang! Luminous sun-starry sky exploded, and the boundless sea of stars churned. When these 2 supreme powers collided, they unleashed a world-destroying power. Bang! 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 One star after another exploded, and the sea of stars within a radius of millions of kilometers evaporated. The entire chaos Tao field space-time distorted, and cracks appeared in space. Even the laws of the world were annihilated by the 2 of them. This sight directly shocked all the great abilities present. If it were not for the fact that they were outside the chaotic Taoist field, and that there were saints watching over the starry sky, just the shockwaves from their attacks would definitely have heavily injured some weaker people. What a terrifying Yi Tiandi! Someone cried out. They were in extreme awe of Yi Xian's terrifying battle prowess. Regardless of whether Yi Daoyu loses to a quasi-saint or not, today's battle will definitely be recorded in the annals of the 3 worlds. The Yellow Springs priest let out a long sigh. The light dispersed, and the world cleared up. When the 2 extremely terrifying powers were completely unleashed, the figures of Yi Xian and the myriad poison ancestor appeared in the center of the chaotic Taoist field again. Yi Xian was dressed in black, and 3,000 strands of blood drooped behind his head. The insignia of a blood-red moon shone on his forehead, and his eyes had already become grayish-white. The dark mist around him was extremely dense, and an extremely chilling aura of Tongtian malice revolved around him. The myriad poison ancestor's expression was ugly. A strand of chaotic light surged around him, and the space around him seemed to collapse slightly. However, his gaze towards Yi Xian was cold and gloomy. The myriad poison ancestor had never thought that Yi Xian would actually block his attack, and Yi Xian would not be harmed at all. He struggled to accept this, nor did he want to accept it. Chapter 574. Although the myriad poison ancestor had only become a quasi-saint 100,000 years ago, his level of existence was already different from immortals. He could not compare to the veteran quasi-saints, but he had actually failed to suppress a grand immortal with a single strike. That was basically the greatest insult to him. The myriad poison ancestor was not the only one with an ugly expression. The various great abilities were stunned as well, as they could not understand how Yi Xian had managed to receive an attack from a quasi-saint no matter what. Actually, no one knew that Yi Xian's current battle prowess had already reached the limits of a peak grand immortal. And the reason why he could take on an attack from a quasi-saint was because of his various trump cards. Firstly, Yi Xian walked the path of proving his way through strength, which was not something a regular Daluo Jingxian could compare to. The Tribulation Transcender transformation had allowed Yi Xian's battle prowess to skyrocket. He had the Immortal Defying formation protecting him, the Origin Immortal body was close to completion, and the Indestructible soul was protecting him. When all of these factors were combined, it made Yi Xian extremely terrifying. It was possible to say that he was invincible among the Daluo Jingxian, which was also why he could receive an attack from a quasi-saint. Of course, the various great abilities obviously had no idea about Yi Xian's trump cards. They only saw that Yi Xian was only at the 4th heavenly layer of Grand Immortal, yet he displayed battle prowess that was even more terrifying than a peak Grand Immortal. So that's all a quasi-saint can do. Suddenly, Yi Xian said coldly, under the shocked gazes of the various great abilities. Yi Xian actually did not know how to advance or retreat. He directly tore through the starry space and charged towards the myriad poison ancestor first. How dare you? This sight made the myriad poison ancestor's face turn icy cold. Terrifying killing intent appeared in his eyes. He was just a mere golden immortal of the great firmament. Yet he actually did not take him seriously at all. He was actually bold enough to attack him so recklessly. If he did not suppress him on the spot, the myriad poison ancestor would probably become a laughingstock if the outside world learned about this. Die! The world was boundless, and all the laws were immeasurable. Quasi-saints were far too terrifying. Every single action they made could draw on the power of the world. The myriad poison ancestor's palm strike towards Yi Xian caused the space there to collapse. It was just far too terrifying. Bang! A single strike Yi Xian. Yi Xian! But he... Bang! The Origin Immortal body was terrifying. Even though Yi Xian had not reached quasi-saint, the punch contained all of his battle prowess. It directly sent the myriad poison ancestor flying. The sound of bones cracking rang out from the myriad poison ancestor's chest. The crowd was thrown into an uproar as they looked at one another in shock. When the myriad poison ancestor was sent flying by Yi Xian's punch, he was sent flying 1,000,000 kilometers away. Who knew how many planets had exploded, which made the various great masters watch in horror. Go Yi Xian! Suddenly, the Empyrean fairy cried out in excitement. Her beautiful face flushed red as she gazed at Yi Xian's back with infatuation. Her gaze was filled with admiration. It was no wonder the Empyrean fairy reacted like this. Yi Xian could send a quasi-saint flying with Daluo Jingxian's cultivation. That was basically unbelievable. So how could the Empyrean fairy not become extremely excited? It was also at this moment that the Empyrean fairy became absolutely certain that Yi Xian was the 7th saint of heavens ordained. As a result, she gazed at Yi Xian's back in yearning, deeply imprinting Yi Xian's figure into her mind. Big brother, retreat! Suddenly the rock demon shrieked in fright. However, before Yi Xian could return to his senses, a streak of chaotic light erupted from the depths of space. Under the Empyrean fairy's stunned gaze, the streak of chaotic light directly pierced Yi Xian's chest. A terrifying, bloody hole appeared on his chest. Spurt! Blood splattered across the sky as the immortal light shattered. This beam of primal chaos light was too terrifying. It wasn't something that Yi Xian could withstand. Even though he'd displayed all of his combat strength, this attack had still caused him to suffer unimaginable injuries. Yi Xian! As the Empyrean fairy's trembling voice rang out, Yi Xian's eyes became dazed. He stared straight into the depths of space. Except the bloody hole in his chest was far too horrifying. Large amounts of blood spurted out, causing him to slowly fall over the chaotic field. Wretched Junior! I'll make sure you never reincarnate. The starry sky exploded, and the meteor shattered. The myriad poison ancestor crossed through the starry sky and returned. His face was twisted, and traces of blood flowed from the corner of his mouth. Clearly, the full-powered strike from Yi Xian earlier had injured his body as well. Although quasi-saints were terrifying, their bodies weren't flawless. On the other hand, Yi Xian's great Luo immortal body was even more terrifying than the ancient great shamans. If he could cultivate the great Luo immortal body to the large success stage, it would be comparable to the bodies of the 12 ancient ancestral shamans. Although the origin immortal body had not reached major perfection, Yi Xian's strike earlier still caused extremely terrifying damage to the myriad poison ancestor. However, a quasi-saint was still a quasi-saint after all. Although his body was heavily injured, his body rapidly recovered under the condensation of the laws of the world. He showed no signs of being injured at all. However, Yi Xian had injured him, which was the greatest humiliation to the myriad poison ancestor. How could the myriad poison ancestor not be furious? Die! The myriad poison ancestor crossed through space. When he struck out with his palm, the entire region of space distorted. The huge palm of chaos shot towards Yi Xian with a devastating aura. Immortal ending sword. Clang! 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 Suddenly, the earth-shattering sounds of killing from Tongtian's sword rang out. A streak of green light erupted from behind Yi Xian. Killing intent spread out in all directions. A streak of killing light rushed into the sky from the immortal ending sword, directly cutting through the huge palm of chaos and forcing the myriad poison ancestor to retreat in fright. Spurt. Blood. Bright and beautiful blood constantly flowed out from the corner of Yi Xian's mouth. His face was as pale as paper, but under the shocked gazes of the various great abilities, he slowly stood up. The Sumeru space opened up, and a bottle of pills appeared. Several 9 cycles great immortal golden pills were directly ingested by Yi Xian, which rapidly healed the bloody hole in his chest. Huff. 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 Yi Xian breathed heavily as he stared at the myriad poison ancestor coldly. Although he had ingested the 9 cycles great immortal golden pills, which allowed his body to rapidly recover, the injuries he suffered from a furious strike from a quasi-saint were unimaginable. Clang! Clang! Green light revolved around him as killing intent surged. The immortal ending sword was one of the 4 immortal slaying swords, and it was also Tongtian's natural spiritual treasure. Not only did it possess the power of slaughter from the world, but it also possessed a sliver of the might of a saint, which gave Yi Xian some time to catch his breath. The immortal ending sword? At this moment, the myriad poison ancestor frowned firmly as he stared at the immortal ending sword firmly. A smear of fear appeared in his eyes. The 4 immortal slaying swords slaughtered the world. They were the greatest killing weapon beneath the heavens. During the War of Gods, Tongtian had even cast down the immortal slaying sword formation, taking on the 4 great saints alone. The reputation of the 4 immortal slaying swords could be described as unprecedented. So how could the myriad poison ancestor not know about them? Chapter 575. Of course, what the myriad poison ancestor feared was not the immortal ending sword, as he was a quasi-saint after all. The immortal ending sword was only one of the 4 immortal slaying swords, so it could not cause him any harm. What the myriad poison ancestor truly feared was the immortal slaying sword formation. Like most people, he suspected Yi Xian possessed the immortal slaying sword formation. If Yi Xian really did come with the immortal slaying sword formation, he would have to retreat. And no matter what, Yi Xian had the Tongtian behind him. Although the myriad poison ancestor seemed like he wanted to kill Yi Xian, it was actually just a bluff. He would only heavily injure Yi Xian at most, but he would never take his life. Rise sword! As the myriad poison ancestor was bewildered and doubtful, Yi Xian's sword finger swept through the starry sky. The immortal ending sword unleashed a murderous aura, turning into a scarlet streak of light that shot towards the myriad poison ancestor. Clang! The myriad poison ancestor retreated rapidly and flicked out a streak of chaotic light with his finger. With a great clang of metal, the immortal ending sword was knocked away. A quasi-saint was a quasi-saint after all. It had already surpassed the range of immortals. They were on a completely different level of existence. The absolute sword Immortal could not be described as weak, while Yi Xian definitely was not weak among peak Grand Immortal Realm cultivators. But he was still unable to harm the myriad poison ancestor at all. Yi Xian, unless you possess the 4 immortal slaying swords, you're not my opponent. It's still not too late for you to admit defeat right now. The myriad poison ancestor squinted his eyes and spoke extremely sternly. Clearly, he was testing out Yi Xian's trump card. If Yi Xian really did possess the 4 immortal slaying swords, he would turn around and leave without saying anything else. Yi Xian did not waste any words. He formed a seal with the Tongtian sword, and the immortal ending sword erupted with the sound of Tongtian killing once again. He and his sword shot towards the myriad poison ancestor like the 9 heavens. Clang! 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 The immortal ending Tongtian rushed into the air. Thousands of streaks of light erupted in the starry sky, condensing into a starry sky sword diagram. It filled the entire place with the aura of slaughter. Petty tricks! The myriad poison ancestor's face turned cold. Chaotic light revolved around him. He did not dodge at all, allowing Yi Xian to charge towards him. His eyes were filled with extreme disdain. Invulnerability and indestructibility referred to saints of the heavenly path. However, as a quasi-saint, the myriad poison ancestor had already begun to comprehend the power of chaos, so he obviously could not rival saints. However, there was no need for him to dodge Yi Xian's killing techniques. As with Yi Xian's current cultivation, abilities were unable to harm him at all. Ding ding ding! The starry sky sword diagram enveloped the myriad poison ancestor, and the countless streaks of sword light were blocked outside the chaotic light. No matter how Yi Xian controlled the immortal ending sword, he was unable to harm the myriad poison ancestor at all. Scram! The wrath of a quasi-saint could turn the world upside down. The myriad poison ancestor's sleeves danced in the starry sky, and surging holy light mixed with the laws of the world shot out, directly blasting Yi Xian away with his sword. Spurt! A mouthful of blood sprayed from Yi Xian's mouth. His tough immortal body of origin cracked. Even though Yi Xian walked the path of proving his way through strength, he still suffered extremely heavy injuries against a furious strike from a quasi-saint. This was not to say that proving one's way through strength was not powerful enough. This path was the strongest path, as well as the most rugged path. Yi Xian had managed to crush so many peak Grand Immortal realms, as a 4th heavenly layer Grand Immortal, which demonstrated the terrors of proving one's way through strength. However, Yi Xian's cultivation was far too low. He was worlds apart from Quasi-Saint, which had already exceeded the limits of proving one's way through strength. If Yi Xian's cultivation could reach the peak of Grand Immortal, perhaps even defeating a Quasi-Saint would not be impossible. Unfortunately, he was only at the 4th heavenly layer of Grand Immortal right now, which made him constantly at a disadvantage against the myriad poison ancestor. His life was in great danger too. Yi Xian was heavily injured again, which made the Empyrean fairy cry out in worry. She suddenly looked towards the Nuwa in the starry sky, and a sliver of pleading appeared in her eyes. Clearly, Yi Xian was only Daoyuo Jingxian, so how could he fight against a quasi-saint? Right now, only the Nuwa could end this battle. Unfortunately, Nuwa said nothing. She stood high above the starry sky, looking down on everyone indifferently. She had no plans to end this battle at all. No one knew what the Nuwa was thinking either. Why hasn't Yi Tiandi conceded yet? He sure is stupid. He wants to defeat a quasi-saint with his cultivation as a Grand Immortal? That's a complete joke. That's right. Ever since the creation of the world, I've never heard of anyone who can defeat a quasi-saint. Yi Xian will definitely lose today. If he really did possess the 4 immortal slaying swords, it would be a different story. However, he still hasn't used the other 3 swords even now, so the 4 immortal slaying swords probably aren't in his hands at all. The various experts discussed animatedly and expressed their own opinions. Among them, there were those who mocked and disdained him, and there were also those who sighed helplessly. However, without exception, no one thought highly of Yi Xian. Obviously, in front of a quasi-saint, Yi Xian could only lose. At this moment, In the chaotic square, the myriad poison ancestor stood with his hands behind his back as he squinted at Yi Xian. If it were not for the fact that he had always feared Yi Xian possessing the 4 immortal slaying swords, he would have suppressed Yi Xian a long time ago. Why would he waste so much time on Yi Xian? However, while the myriad poison ancestor feared the 4 immortal slaying swords, Yi Xian's terrifying battle prowess left the myriad poison ancestor utterly shocked, as the myriad poison ancestor understood very well that if their positions were switched, he definitely would not have been able to endure a single strike from a quasi-saint. He would have died a long time ago, vanishing from the starry sky, just like how one could know the whole picture from a single spot. Yi Xian was only at the 4th heavenly layer of Grand Immortal right now, yet his battle prowess was already so terrifying. If he reached the 3rd boundary of the Grand Immortal realm, or even quasi-saints, probably no one would be his opponent apart from saints. Thinking of this terrifying outcome, even the myriad poison ancestor shivered inside. His gaze towards Yi Xian was filled with obscure killing intent. Cough. Suddenly, a light cough came out of Yi Xian's mouth. He slowly stood up from the ground, and a bloody light quietly flashed through his eyes. Although his entire body was covered in blood, the evil aura around him became even denser. Quasi-saints really are very powerful. Yi Xian's face was sinister. When he raised his head and looked at the myriad poison ancestor, he murmured, "I just wonder if you can stop the greatest killing artifact of all time?" "What did you say?" Hearing Yi Xian's words, the myriad poison ancestor was taken aback. "Come, Halbert." Suddenly, Yi Xian let out a low roar. The center of his brows glowed as a boundless dark beam of light flickered between his brows. A black light shot out from between Yi Xian's brows, and the chaotic aura of the ancient and modern world bloomed in the primal chaos Dao field. Rumble! The darkness was boundless, and the world was thrown into chaos. The boundless starry sky gradually darkened, and the luminous sea of stars stagnated. The rumbling stars seemed to have been frozen. A small halberd swelled in the wind, until it became 3 meters long and hovered before Yi Xian. Chapter 576. A strand of black light threw the world into chaos, suppressing the past and present. When the heaven-slaying halberd appeared, even the space outside the 33 heavens froze, and a silent sense of great terror weighed down on everyone's minds. Whether it was the great masters of the various realms, the myriad poison ancestor who was a quasi-saint, or even the Saint Nuwa who resided high in the starry sky, all of their hearts trembled slightly when the heavens punishing halberd appeared. This is... Above the starry sky, the Saint Nuwa's expression changed slightly. When she opened and closed her eyes, they shone with sacred light. She was currently observing the heaven-slaying halberd extremely sternly. In the center of the primal chaos hall, the myriad poison ancestor's expression changed slightly, as when the heaven-slaying halberd appeared, his unperturbed mind actually began to tremble uncontrollably. A feeling of extreme danger filled his mind. Whether it was mortals, immortals, or even quasi-saints, all living beings had an instinct to seek fortune and avoid disaster. As a quasi-saint, the myriad poison ancestor was no exception, as the heaven-slaying halberd gave him an extremely great sense of threat. Suddenly, before the myriad poison ancestor could even react, Yi Xian wielded the halberd. When the halberd swung through the starry sky, the world within 10 million kilometers rumbled and exploded. A smear of blood-red light flickered silently on the pitch-black halberd. Kill! The halberd suppressed the heavens, throwing the past and present into chaos. The cold tip of the halberd flickered with a cold light that could bury all things, while the starry sky within 10 million kilometers was plunged into boundless darkness. Yi Xian and the heaven-slaying halberd seemed to become one, shooting towards the myriad poison ancestor as a streak of light of dawn. Danger! Retreat! The myriad poison ancestor's expression changed drastically. He retreated violently for 500,000 kilometers, all because the aura from the heaven-slaying halberd gave him an illusion of death. As a result, he was afraid to receive the strike that could bury all things head-on. Rumble! The light of oblivion, the light of dawn. The sliver of darkness ripped through time and space, directly reducing the starry sky to a vacuum. Who knew how many stars exploded in the boundless starry sky? What kind of spiritual treasure is this? The myriad poison ancestor roared out in shock, as the heaven-slaying halberd in Yi Xian's hand was far too terrifying. It seemed like it was nothing special, but everything that came into contact with the halberd would be reduced to dust. The aura of withering all things basically made his soul shiver. Unfortunately, Yi Xian didn't answer his question. The heaven-punishing halberd was glowing and buzzing. Strands of primal chaos elemental light were rising, and there was even a dark light that was emitting the aura of all living things. Myriad poison of the myriad poison ancestors, myriad poison ancestors. Of his blood-red hair had of his hair had of his hair had of his, and his of his of, and of his hair hair had. His hair myriad of his had of his of himself. Of it. Of heaven heaven heaven, heaven 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 of the heaven-slaying halberd D. The myriad poison halberoth the of the darkness he the halberd. It was of it of the myriad seemed. S. Sky heaven ing of his. It the heaven slaying it. Of it. Of it, sky, and it of it. Clang, clang, clang. The starry sky exploded and space exploded. The myriad poison ancestor refused to let the halberd touch him. He sent out strands of chaotic light, constantly blasting Yi Xian away. Even with the heaven-slaying halberd in hand, Yi Xian was not the opponent of a quasi-saint at all. His body shattered inch by inch. Blood flowed down his arm and dyed the heaven-slaying halberd, making it shine with an extremely strange blood-red light. Suppress! The myriad poison ancestor no longer held back in the end, as he discovered that Yi Xian's aura was becoming more and more frightening. Regardless of whether Yi Xian possessed the 4 immortal slaying swords or not, his only thought right now was to suppress Yi Xian on the spot and directly end this strange battle. Rumble! The quasi-sage's attack caused the starry sky to explode. That strand of primal chaos light broke through the barrier of space and time and transformed into a giant palm that covered the heavens that spanned millions of kilometers in the starry sky. That boundless power caused the starry sky to distort as it directly descended towards Yi Xian. Bang! 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 The full-powered strike of a quasi-saint drew upon the power of the world. Endless laws ran amok. Whenever the huge hand fell, it would cause the starry sky to explode, causing spatial cracks to appear. Run! This scene directly caused the 9 heavens' mysterious maiden to scream. This was because it was impossible for Yi Xian to receive this attack. If it really landed on Yi Xian's body, he would definitely be beaten to the point where his soul would scatter. Arg! Suddenly, Yi Xian roared towards the sky. His gray hair fluttered wildly in the wind, and when he opened and closed his eyes, his pupils turned deathly white. Strands of nirvanic light shot out from his head and into the sky. Something terrifying happened. It was like chaotic thunder had exploded, like space and time had twisted. When Yi Xian's roar rang out, an extremely shocking sight suddenly appeared in the surroundings. Thrum! The starry sky of the luminous sun became completely dark. A sliver of dim light rose up, and mysterious sounds of the Tao rang out from the heavens. Strands of chaotic lightning flashed through the sky of the luminous sun star, and great planets were silently reduced to dust. The terrifying sight was simply startling. However, this was not the end of it. What terrified the various great masters, and the myriad poison ancestor, the most was that the chaotic field of cultivation, within a radius of 10 million kilometers, twisted to the extreme, as if the space there was collapsing. The dim light was boundless and dark. In the center of the twisted field of cultivation, the heaven-slaying halberd shone with a cold light that it had never seen before. It could be called the light of dim light, as all the phenomena in the surroundings were caused by the greatest killing artifact of all time. Thrum! The heaven-slaying halberd rolled and thrummed in Yi Xian's hand. The dim light completely obscured Yi Xian. However, he currently swung the heaven-slaying halberd slowly like he was swinging the universe. It gave off the illusion that he was destroying the world. There was no destructive power, nor was there any sight of the starry sky exploding. Only the man and the halberd glowed in the center of the field of cultivation. However, with the man and the halberd as the center, the field of cultivation within a radius of 10 million kilometers collapsed. The inside of the pile of white jade crystals cracked like a spiderweb, constantly extending in all directions. The seven slaughtering halberd of the heavens of chaos, life-severing. Space and time were inverted, destroying the world. When Yi Xian swung the heaven-slaying halberd, the power of dim light erupted, throwing the laws of space and time and the surroundings into disorder. When he swung the halberd towards the myriad poison ancestor, he vanished in a single moment, which made the chaotic field of cultivation, within a radius of 10 million kilometers, sink into boundless darkness. The darkness was boundless, and all things were destroyed. No one knew what had happened in the chaotic field of cultivation, nor did anyone know what kind of great Tongtian ability Yi Xian had used. However, all of them had a feeling that when Yi Xian swung the halberd, their souls seemed to freeze. Even their thoughts came to a standstill. Rumble. After a few dozen breaths of time, beams of dim light of destruction shot out in all directions. The boundless darkness gradually faded away, and the thoughts of the various great powers came back to their senses. When they looked at the Chaos Dojo in shock, the scene that followed completely stunned them in the starry sky. Chapter 577. The chaotic Tao field, which spanned tens of thousands of miles, crumbled inch by inch. Spatial cracks appeared in the endless void. However, this was not the most terrifying scene to the various great divine powers. The most terrifying scene was reflected in their eyes at this moment. The halberd, the great halberd. The great halberd had pierced the myriad poison ancestor's heart, nailing him to death in space. Droplets of blood constantly oozed out from the corner of the myriad poison ancestor's mouth. He stared straight at Yi Xian, as if he had lost all signs of life. Yi Xian was dressed in black, and 3,000 strands of gray hair hung behind his head. His robes fluttered without any wind, and when his eyes opened and closed, the light of annihilation that could annihilate all living things rotated endlessly in his eyes. Spurt. The great halberd threw the sky into chaos and destroyed all things. When Yi Xian slowly pulled the heaven's execution halberd out from the myriad poison ancestor's heart, the blood of the myriad poison ancestor sprayed out, dyeing Yi Xian a bloody red. It was a horrifying sight. Bang! There was a great rumble, and the myriad poison ancestor's body exploded. A mist of blood rained down from the starry sky, and the sight of the rain of blood made everything fall silent. Creak, creak, creak. A few dozen seconds passed, and the sound of chattering teeth constantly rang out. The various great abilities had all become as pale as paper, and even their bodies trembled uncontrollably, which demonstrated just how terrified they were inside. They were unable to believe it, nor were they willing to believe it. The various great abilities thought they were dreaming, as they had never heard of Daluo Jingxian being able to kill a myriad poison ancestor. Killing a myriad poison ancestor had never happened before. This was an insurmountable chasm, as well as an unchanging, ironclad law. However, this ironclad law had been broken today, as they had personally witnessed a legend of saint slaying. If they had not witnessed this with their own eyes, they probably would have never believed it was possible. Rumble. Suddenly, before the various experts could react, Yi Xian fell to the ground like a kite with a broken string. The heavenly punishing halberd in his hand powerlessly fell to the ground, and one person and one halberd fiercely smashed into the shattered primal chaos Tao field. The seven slaughtering halberd of the chaotic heavens. This was a great killing technique, and it could draw on the mysterious power within the heaven's execution halberd. However, Yi Xian had suffered an extremely great backlash when he used the halberd technique. Not only had his cultivation been depleted, but his body had also suffered unimaginable injuries. Blood constantly flowed from Yi Xian's body, dyeing the ground beneath him red. Yi Xian had also fallen unconscious from using the halberd technique. At the same time, all the powerful cultivators woke up. Greed flashed through their eyes as they stared at the heaven-destroying halberd that had fallen into the Taoist field of chaos. Obviously, the power of the heaven-destroying halberd was obvious to all. Even a pre-saint was killed by this attack. How could the powerful cultivators not be greedy? Although these people were greedy, no one dared to act rashly. This was because they were outside the 33 levels of heaven, and Saint Nuwa was high above the 9 heavens. If anyone dared to have any thoughts in front of her, they would be courting death. Yi Xian. The Empyrean fairy flew across the sky and appeared directly in front of Yi Xian. She shook his body continuously, hoping to wake Yi Xian up from his coma. Master, Yi Xian has already won. Disciple earnestly requests that you. The Empyrean fairy said anxiously. Clearly Yi Xian's injuries were too severe. She hoped that Nuwa would announce the end of this event, so that she could quickly heal Yi Xian. Unfortunately, before the Empyrean fairy could finish her words, Saint Nuwa's voice rang out from all directions in the starry sky. However, when the Empyrean fairy heard it, she was stunned and stood rooted to the ground like a clay puppet. The outcome has not been decided. Yi Xian has not won yet. Just a simple sentence from Nuwa caused the heavens and the earth to fall deathly silent, and it even caused the eyes of all the experts in the surroundings to be filled with shock. They didn't know exactly what Nuwa meant by those words. Yi Xian. Suddenly, a furious roar that could shatter stars erupted in the starry sky. Terrifying streaks of light crisscrossed through the starry sky. The strands of chaotic light were so dazzling that they were unable to open their eyes. A speck of golden light condensed in the starry sky. Eventually, there was a shocking explosion, and an extremely terrifying figure condensed in the starry sky. The myriad poison ancestor? Outside, the rock demon roared out in fright. He struggled to believe his eyes. It was not just the rock demon. The Yellow Springs Taoist, the ghost Emperor Shintu, the immortal elder of the South Pole, and even the ancient grand shaman, the sword demon, were all stunned speechless. Their gazes towards the myriad poison ancestor were filled with extreme shock. The various heavens execution experts were thrown into an uproar. The Empyrean fairy's eyes were dazed. Only when the myriad poison ancestor made his way towards the primal chaos hall did the Empyrean fairy snap back to her senses. I am possible. Why? You're clearly dead already. Why? The Empyrean fairy murmured with a trembling voice. Clearly, she was unable to accept this reality. Dead. The myriad poison ancestor was enveloped in chaotic light, so his might as a quasi-saint was on full display. He looked at the unconscious Yi Xian with extremely terrifying killing intent. Even his eyes had become scarlet like blood, which demonstrated just how furious he was. As long as the true spirit exists, quasi-saints will never die. The myriad poison ancestor roared out viciously. He made his way towards the unconscious Yi Xian step by step. When he raised his hand, boundless holy light erupted, and devastating ripples permeated the surroundings. Clearly, he wanted to kill Yi Xian on the spot in a single stroke, so that he could never reincarnate. It was no wonder that the myriad poison ancestor was so furious. Extreme killing intent rose up in his heart. As a mighty quasi-saint, he had actually been beaten to death by Yi Xian. If it were not for the fact that he had become a quasi-saint and developed a bit of true spirit, he really would have been obliterated by Yi Xian. Although the myriad poison ancestor had been reborn through his true spirit, the damage that Yi Xian had inflicted on him earlier was far too great. He had even destroyed the foundation of his way, making it impossible for him to become a saint for the rest of his life. His cultivation would forever remain at early quasi-saint, which was even worse than killing him. By now, the myriad poison ancestor had already lost his mind. His hatred for Yi Xian had reached the limit. His only thought right now was to kill Yi Xian and refine Yi Xian's soul day and night, making him live in eternal pain. Only then could he resolve the endless hatred in his heart. By destroying the foundation of his way, he had severed the myriad poison ancestor's path to becoming a saint. How could the myriad poison ancestor spare Yi Xian from a grievance as great as this? Rumble. A strand of holy light descended from the 9 heavens, directly taking the Empyrean fairy away from Yi Xian's side. When the Empyrean fairy reappeared, she was already standing beside the Empress Nuwa. Master, please save him. The Empyrean fairy knelt down as her eyes became watery. She constantly kowtowed towards Nuwa, as she knew that the only person who could save Yi Xian's life right now was Nuwa. Otherwise, Yi Xian would definitely die a miserable death at the hands of the myriad poison ancestor. Chapter 578. In the cycle of the heavenly Tao, there is life and death. If Yi Xian really dies, this is his own fate, Niwa said calmly, showing no intention of saving him. Master. Hearing Goddess Nviwa's words, a line of clear tears flowed from the eyes of Goddess Nviwa. However, before she could continue to plead, Goddess Nviwa had already fixed her to the side, and she could not even make a sound. Yi Xian, are you really the seventh heaven's destined saint? Niwa murmured, a trace of doubt flashing across her eyes. In fact, from the beginning to the end, the so-called Niwa Palace Grand Gathering was more like a test for Yi Xian by sage Niwa. This was because Niwa had always guessed that Yi Xian was very likely to be the seventh heaven's destined saint. If he really was the heaven's destined saint, he would definitely be able to survive in the hands of a pre-saint. This was because the heavenly Tao would definitely not let him die in vain at the hands of a pre-saint, and would even leave him with a glimmer of hope. However, if Yi Xian was not the seventh heaven's destined saint, then it would not matter if he was killed by a pre-saint. This could also be said to be Sage Niwa's plan to kill someone with a borrowed knife. The thoughts of a saint were unfathomable, and no one knew Niwa's true thoughts. However, Niwa constantly sensed the changes in the heavenly Tao. This was because only when the heavenly Tao gave a glimmer of hope that Yi Xian would be able to survive in the hands of a pre-saint. This glimmer of hope could be the tribulation of a pre-saint, or the thunder of heavenly punishment. It could even be arranged for another pre-saint to appear and save Yi Xian. This was the glimmer of hope that the heavenly Tao left for Yi Xian. It could also indirectly prove that he was the seventh heaven's destined saint. Unfortunately, when Niwa sensed the changes in the heavenly Tao, she did not sense any changes in the heavenly Tao, let alone leave any chance for Yi Xian. Sigh! A sliver of disappointment flashed through Niwa's eyes, and she let out a long sigh, as the myriad poison ancestor had already sent a palm strike towards Yi Xian in the field of chaos. However, even when Yi Xian was about to die, the heavenly Tao did not give Yi Xian any chance of survival. This also allowed Niwa to understand that Yi Xian was not the seventh saint of heaven's ordained. If he was not a saint, then he was an ant. Since the heavenly Tao had not manifested any vitality, Yi Xian was no longer fated to be a saint. In the eyes of the Niwa, his life and death were no different from that of an ant. She once again regained her calm and tranquil state of mind. Suddenly, Niwa cried out in surprise, as the myriad poison ancestor did not kill Yi Xian. Instead, he suddenly froze on the spot for no reason, like he had turned into a clay puppet. What's going on? Niwa's expression changed slightly. She extended her slender fingers and constantly formed seals to divine the changes in the heavenly secrets. But the heavenly Tao did not change at all. Everything continued to operate according to its normal trajectory. No, there's something strange. Invulnerable to all techniques and tribulations, Niwa was one of the 6 saints of the world. She could be described as the strongest existence. But no matter how she divined the changes in the heavenly Tao, there was no reaction at all. Why had the myriad poison ancestor suddenly stopped and not killed Yi Xian? Bewildered and uncertain, her heart wavered. This was what Niwa was currently thinking. She stopped divining. Instead, she gazed at the field of chaos, hoping to discover why the myriad poison ancestor had not killed Yi Xian. In the field of chaos, the myriad poison ancestor stood where he was like a clay statue. Even his eyes were frozen. Only droplets of cold sweat constantly appeared on his forehead. It was not that the myriad poison ancestor did not want to kill Yi Xian. Instead, when he was about to kill Yi Xian, an indescribable fear appeared in his mind, directly freezing him where he was. It was as if a great, terrifying existence was looking down on him from beyond the chaos, preventing him from making any rash movements. Thump! Suddenly in the starry sky, perhaps the Empress Niwa discovered something. She extended a slender finger, and a streak of light directly descended on the myriad poison ancestor. It also lightened the myriad poison ancestor's body, allowing him to return to normal. Die! The myriad poison ancestor was not stupid. When he sensed the will of the Saint Nuwa, his face became vicious and terrifying. He swung his hand towards Yi Xian's forehead. If the strike landed, Yi Xian would definitely die. Thump, thump, thump. Suddenly, a series of gentle footsteps rang out in the starry sky, immediately freezing the myriad poison ancestor where he was again. Even the space there had stopped moving. It was not just the myriad poison ancestor. The various great cultivators were all frozen as well. Even their thoughts had stopped. Wrong, it wasn't these people who were frozen. Instead, it was the time of the entire world that had stopped. Look, the great stars that had been rotating without end had all stopped moving. The waves in the vast sea of stars had also stopped moving. This completely proved that time and space in this world were no longer rotating. The only person who was unaffected was the Saint Nuwa, who resided high in the starry sky. However, at this moment, Saint Nuwa's expression changed drastically. Her body, which had not moved for a long time, suddenly stood up. She looked at the starry sky in all directions, and there was an extremely shocked expression in her eyes. There was also an indescribable sense of nervousness. Space and time had frozen, and the great Tao had not manifested. Even though Nuwa was a saint, she had never heard of something like this. This had completely exceeded her imagination, so how could she not be shocked? Swish, swish, swish. Like the flow of the river of time, like the flow of time was reversing, the sound of surging waves echoed in the surroundings. A river of time appeared in the starry sky of luminous brilliance. A blurry figure seemed to have reversed the river of time, walking from the future to the present, crossing the barrier of space, and reversing the river of time. The figure was lonely and bleak. The waves of time beneath his feet surged, directly sending him into the chaotic hall of enlightenment. He even stood beside Yi Xian. "Who are you, fellow?" Nuwa cried out in fright. She tried her best to control her fear, but her trembling voice betrayed her nervousness. Throughout the ages, the great Tao walks alone. Today's karma has already been born. He will definitely settle this with you in the future, the mysterious figure said. He glanced at Nuwa indifferently, before looking at the unconscious Yi Xian silently. A smear of sorrow flashed through his eyes. The path of heaven is difficult to traverse, and all things are buried and destroyed. You and I share the same origin, so can you transcend? The mysterious figure murmured. He did not seem to have done anything, but the myriad poison ancestor had already been reduced to ashes, directly vanishing into space. It was as if he had never existed in this world. You've reversed the river of time, and broken the world of the past and present. I will face a great tribulation in the future. Can you change the future in this life? The mysterious phantom smiled sadly. From the beginning to the end, he did not even look at Saint Nuwa. It was as if the so-called saint was not even worth mentioning in his eyes. When he stepped into the sky again, the reversed long river of time flowed down again, causing the mysterious phantom to disappear from the world. Rumble! In the starry sky of luminous brilliance, the great stars began to rotate once again. The boundless sea of stars surged. The thoughts of the various great masters suddenly returned, and the world began to operate once again. Only the Saint Nuwa remained in a daze in the depths of the starry sky. She seemed to have turned into a statue, without moving or saying anything. Chapter 579. The wheels of time revolved according to the unchanging laws of time. The oceans moved and time passed. Legend had it that there was a long river in the world. This river was known as the River of Time, or it was also known as the River of Time and Space. It recorded everything that happened over time. Whether you were a mortal or a saint of the heavenly path, you would all be subjugated by the River of Time. Saints were invulnerable to all tribulations and techniques. They were supreme existences. However, even saints were unable to manipulate the River of Time, let alone have the ability to turn time and space upside down. This was because this had already surpassed the level of saints. It was an unimaginably great horror. Outside the 33rd heaven, the stars shone brightly in the sky, and the sea of stars rumbled. Everything was moving according to its normal trajectory. However, the various great powers were perplexed, and had a strange feeling in their hearts. It was as if they had missed out on some earth-shattering event, or as if they had forgotten some memory. This extremely strange feeling filled everyone's mind. Time stopped, space froze, and time and space were disrupted. The world was shattered. No one knew what had happened. However, when the various great abilities saw that the myriad poison ancestor was no longer in the chaotic site, and that Yi Xian was still unconscious, all of them were shocked. Where's the myriad poison ancestor? Some people were surprised and doubtful, gazing into the distance in search of the myriad poison ancestor's whereabouts. His aura is gone, and there's no trace of him at all. What's going on? Some of the great abilities said with trembling voices. They had no idea why the myriad poison ancestor had vanished. The saint has taken action. Suddenly the rock demon's face sank. He raised his head and looked at Nuwa in the starry sky. He just happened to see Nuwa enveloped in holy light, and her aura was currently pulsing chaotically. This sight naturally made the various great abilities look towards Nuwa. When they saw the saint's aura become chaotic, the starry sky suddenly fell deathly silent. Everyone's eyes froze, and a smear of fear appeared in the depths of their eyes. Clearly, the various great abilities believed that the myriad poison ancestor had vanished for no reason, because the saint had taken action and killed him. Otherwise, why would the myriad poison ancestor vanish so strangely? Moreover, they had clearly witnessed Yi Xian dying a miserable death at the hands of the myriad poison ancestor earlier. If it weren't for the saints saving Yi Xian, how was Yi Xian supposed to survive? Unfortunately, no one knew that Yi Xian's survival had nothing to do with Nuwa. It was all thanks to the mysterious figure. It was also because of the appearance of the mysterious figure that Saint Nuwa was terrified to the extreme. Even now, she was still unable to calm down. Yi Xian. Suddenly, a surprise cry rang out. The Empyrean fairy swooped down and directly appeared beside Yi Xian. She was indescribably excited when she saw that Yi Xian was still alive. Yi Xian's eyelids trembled slightly as he slowly opened his eyes. The Empyrean fairy's face was reflected in his dazed eyes. Where am I? Yi Xian murmured. He felt like he had a dream, a very, very long dream. In the dream, he dreamt that he was about to die at the hands of the myriad poison ancestor. He was unwilling to accept this. He was furious. He wanted to wake up as soon as possible and continue his battle against the myriad poison ancestor. But he was completely powerless against the might of a quasi-saint. In the end, all he could do was wait for death helplessly. However, something startling happened. In Yi Xian's dream, when he was about to die, he suddenly became another person. A person he found both unfamiliar and extremely familiar at the same time. This person was omnipresent and eternal, as if he was the great terror of the eternal heavens. He had already surpassed all living things, which made Yi Xian's heart tremble. However, what made Yi Xian feel extremely strange was that he seemed to have become this person. His heart was filled with sorrow. He only remembered strolling along the river of time and saying a few strange things. After killing the myriad poison ancestor, he stepped onto the river of time again and left this world. Yi Xian was extremely doubtful. This was not him. But a voice in his heart told him that this person really was him. This extremely strange feeling made Yi Xian think bitterly in his dream, but he failed to find the answer he wanted in the end. When the Empyrean fairy's voice rang out, Yi Xian returned from his dream. However, when he opened his eyes, he was not dead. The myriad poison ancestor had truly vanished, as if the dream was real. This made Yi Xian frown slightly. His eyes were filled with confusion and confusion. Yi Xian, quickly thank Master. She was the one who saved your life. Seeing Yi Xian wake up, the Empyrean fairy spoke to Yi Xian excitedly with a flushed face. This also made Yi Xian dismiss his surprise and bewilderment. He raised his head and looked at Nuwa in the starry sky. Unfortunately, Yi Xian did not thank her at all. He stared at the Saint Nuwa in the starry sky in a daze, as the person who saved him in his dream was not Nuwa, but someone he found extremely familiar. It was also because of this person's appearance that the Saint Nuwa became extremely frightened. Do you see him? Suddenly Yi Xian asked gently. He stared straight at the Empress Nuwa. as if Yi Xian wanted to confirm whether he was dreaming or not. Only Niwa could give him an answer to this. The gathering is over. Yi Xian has emerged victorious. All of you can leave. In the starry sky, the Empress Niwa did not answer Yi Xian's question. Her voice was indifferent and calm, but if Yi Xian could see Niwa's face, he would definitely discover in surprise that Niwa's face was extremely pale. Even her lips trembled gently. Rumble! The starry sky of the immensity sea changed. When Niwa's voice rang out, the world there suddenly changed. All the great masters vanished, and the chaotic halls of Tao that spanned tens of thousands of kilometers vanished without a trace. Empyrean Fairy, bring him to the Niwa Palace to see me. The Empress hurriedly left, but when she returned to the Niwa Palace, her trembling voice reverberated throughout the starry sky. This caused Yi Xian to narrow his eyes. He had already discovered that something was wrong with this saint's mood. Could this not be a dream? Yi Xian murmured to himself. The aura around him was slightly stifled. Yi Xian, quickly come with me to see Master. Don't let her wait for too long. The Empyrean Fairy did not notice the change in Niwa. She only thought that Niwa had saved Yi Xian's life. Yi Xian must have been the seventh saint of the heavenly path. At this moment, he had to take care of Yi Xian. In the Niwa Palace, it was immeasurable and impenetrable. Chaotic light covered her body, and holy light rose slightly. The Empress Niwa sat cross-legged in the void. Rumbling sounds of the Tao were faintly discernible in the void. This also revealed her supreme status as a saint of the heavenly path. The Empyrean Fairy knelt in the Niwa Palace. Yi Xian stood beside the Empyrean Fairy. Although the Empyrean Fairy secretly tugged on the corner of Yi Xian's clothes to make him kneel, she did not make Yi Xian kneel at all. Chapter 580. Not bowing or kneeling in front of the saint could be said to be disrespectful to the saint, but the Niwa did not say anything. It was as if she had tacitly approved of Yi Xian's attitude. Today Yi Xian has won. Empyrean Fairy, you can marry him. After you become the Queen Mother, you must mother the three realms. You must not be unruly and willful. The Niwa's holy voice rumbled. It also made the Empyrean Fairy kowtow to her. However, her beautiful face flushed red. Empyrean Fairy, you may leave. I have something to say to Yi Xian. Yes, Master. The Empyrean Fairy stood up and left. Before she left, she gave Yi Xian a subtle look. It was as if she was telling Yi Xian not to be rude in front of the saint. Rumble. When the Empyrean Fairy left the Niwa Palace, the open door closed with a rumble. Only Yi Xian and the Niwa were left in the Niwa Palace. An extremely oppressive atmosphere quietly appeared. It also made the entire Niwa Palace extremely quiet. After a full 10 breaths of time, neither of them spoke first. However, the oppressive atmosphere became even heavier. However, Yi Xian didn't feel the slightest bit of fear as he looked directly at the Saint Niwa in the air. Yi Xian, you are so rude to look directly at me. Suddenly, the chaotic light around the Niwa Palace dissipated. An indescribable face appeared. When this face was reflected in Yi Xian's eyes, it made Yi Xian's soul tremble. In that instant he fell into a trance. Yi Xian asked himself. The most beautiful woman he had ever met was the Moon Fairy. The Moon Fairy's beauty could be said to be the best in the three realms. Even the Empyrean Fairy paled in comparison. However, when Yi Xian saw Niwa's face, it made his soul tremble. A trace of intoxication appeared in his eyes. If not for the eternal primordial spirit shaking in his sea of consciousness, Yi Xian was afraid that he would have woken up from Niwa's face. Niwa was not devastatingly beautiful. Her beauty could not be described with words. Yi Xian could not describe what it was like, but Yi Xian was certain that no matter who saw Niwa's face, they would fall head over heels for her. Unfortunately, Yi Xian walked the path of becoming a saint through strength. He cultivated the way of emotionlessness. Furthermore, he had seen the Moon Fairy's beauty before. Niwa's soul-stirring appearance only made him fall into a trance for a moment. However, he recovered in an instant. You're very beautiful. Yi Xian sighed in admiration. How dare you? Niwa frowned when she heard Yi Xian's words. Her voice was cold and holy light circulated around her, as if she wanted to teach Yi Xian a lesson. Clearly, as a saint, no one had dared to speak to her like that. Yi Xian's words were simply disrespectful to her. However, when Nuwa thought of the mysterious figure, her eyes trembled slightly. In the end, she did not attack Yi Xian. The holy light around her slowly dissipated, and she returned to her usual calm state. "Tell me who is he?" Nuwa said calmly. However, her voice trembled slightly, proving that her heart was not calm. "You saw him." Yi Xian was slightly stunned. His eyes deepened, because he was completely sure from Nuwa's words that he was not dreaming. What had happened was real. "Tell me, who is he? Is he your master?" Nuwa stood up in the air and strolled towards Yi Xian. Her beautiful eyes were like the stars in the sky. She hoped Yi Xian could give her a reasonable answer. Up close, her fragrance assailed his nostrils. Nuwa gave off a certain fragrance. It was a faint bodily fragrance, which also enchanted Yi Xian slightly. But he still woke up very quickly. "Sure enough, it wasn't you who saved me. If it weren't for his appearance, I probably would have died to the myriad poison ancestors' hands." Thinking back to everything that had happened in the dream, Yi Xian finally understood that the person who had saved him was not Nuwa, but the mysterious figure. This also made his gaze towards Nuwa become rather cold. Yi Xian was not stupid. The opening of the gathering in Nuwa's palace, and the appearance of the quasi-saint, could be described as Nuwa finding a husband for the Empyrean fairy. But it was better described as a test for him. This was because Yi Xian knew that there was still one final saint's position in the world. The opening of the gathering was Nuwa testing whether he was the seventh saint of heaven's will or not. If Yi Xian won, it would also prove that Yi Xian was the seventh saint of heaven's will. However, if Yi Xian died to the hands of the quasi-saint, it would also prove that Yi Xian was not the saint of heaven's will. If he died, then so be it. Nuwa would show no mercy at all. This was because he could tell from how the myriad poison ancestor had attacked him in the end, that Nuwa had never wanted to save him. If it were not for the appearance of the mysterious figure, he really would have died and vanished beyond the 33rd heaven. How would he have the opportunity to talk to Nuwa right now? This was karma, as well as an evil consequence that was neither major nor minor. It was just like what the mysterious figure had said to Nuwa when he appeared. "The karma of today has already been born. He will definitely settle it with you in the future. What was sowed today would be repaid in the future." Right now, Yi Xian was only a grand immortal, while Nuwa was a great saint. Right now, she still could not tell how terrifying the power of karma between the two of them was. However, once Yi Xian became a saint, the karma of the past would definitely be settled. This was also the karma between saints. It could be described as extremely terrifying, and it would manifest itself in the future. Although Nuwa understood this as well, it had already happened. Even if she wanted to salvage the situation, it was already too late. Moreover, whether Yi Xian was the seventh saint of heaven's will or not had not been decided yet, so she temporarily set this matter aside. Right now, Nuwa's only thought was to know who the mysterious figure was. This was because from the moment that person appeared to the moment he left, Nuwa was unable to find out his origins, no matter how she divined. Moreover, the mysterious figure was actually able to manipulate something as legendary as the River of Time. So how could Nuwa not be utterly terrified? As everyone knew, Panga split open the heavens, and Hongjun passed down the path. Ever since the primordial times, Hongjun had merged with the path, and completed the incomplete heavenly path. There were only 7 saints in the world. The 3 purities, the 2 saints of the west, and Nuwa occupied 6 saints. Only the last one remained empty. However, the appearance of the mysterious figure had broken this iron law, as Nuwa could completely sense that the mysterious figure was definitely a saint as well, or it was extremely likely for him to have surpassed saints. What were existences that had surpassed saints? Nuwa had no way of knowing. Could he be comparable to ancestor Hongjun? Nuwa also had no way of knowing. She did not know why such a figure would appear in the world. Moreover, the manifestation of the River of Time had allowed her to see the existence of such a legendary thing. She wanted to go to the Purple Cloud Palace and ask ancestor Hongjun, who had disappeared since ancient times. Perhaps only he knew the origin of the mysterious figure. However, there was no trace of the Purple Cloud Palace, and Ancestor Hongjun had already merged with the heavenly path. Unless Ancestor Hongjun himself appeared, the 6 great saints would not be able to see Ancestor Hongjun. At this moment, perhaps the only person who could answer her question was Yi Xian in front of her, because the mysterious figure had appeared for Yi Xian. If he had not appeared, Yi Xian would have died long ago. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.